Call the meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is approval or revision of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you, Kelly. Second from Cindy. We'd like to add one item to the agenda, actually, and that's an executive session for the purpose of discussion of superintendent's year-end and mid-year evaluations. So is there a motion to approve that agenda as amended? Thank you, Rebecca. Second from, I'm sorry, Jason, go ahead.
No, I was going to second it. I was just asking where the agenda going. You didn't
Executive
specify.
session is at the bottom. It's already on
So
there.
it's already on the
9.1.
agenda, so that's why
Yep.
I'm asking the question.
Well, we have to put the reason. So that's the reason.
Okay. So I'll second it. So it's still going to be item 9.01, correct?
Yes, but now we have the
Got it.
reason. All those in favor, please indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? All right, moving on to item 1.04, Code of Conduct Availability. The 2024-25 Code of Conduct is available for review. The public hearing and adoption of the Code of Conduct will occur at the next regular board meeting. Now, there was a question earlier.
There was an email earlier today from Mr. Seidberg. Right now, this is just the announcement of the Code of Conduct. It's like the first reading, as I put in the reply email. I don't think you were disputing that. You had some concerns on the language regarding artificial intelligence, and I know that's something as a district, as you are all aware of as board members, that we are working through. Our guest speaker this autumn, Dr. Daggett, broached the subject, and I know that's been something that we're investigating. So I don't want to speak for you. You were talking about development of a policy through the policy committee, which might help to put some bumpers in terms of the code.
My concern was simply that there was a change related to AI that's in the version that's now open, available. We're going to have a public hearing at our next meeting, but there's a provision in there specifically dealing with AI and labeling certain uses or not. And we haven't actually ever had that discussion in depth at this point in terms of what the policy is in this district. And I think that putting it in there in this way at this time just opens up a giant Pandora's box that I would be very concerned about. So I would hope that we would have some productive discussions about how we're going to approach AI and in our schools before inserting it into a code of conduct that opens up that Pandora's box.
Well, I know we had sent it out through legal to get vetted. I think as the board is aware, there's been some that, like when calculators were first introduced years ago, didn't want them to permeate the math classroom, prohibition of that, and then others said it's the way of the future, and certainly your point's well taken. I do think we will see, just like we couldn't stop a COVID virus, we're not going to stop AI from happening, and I think we have to be able to develop a policy. I agree with you, because we don't want it to turn into the haves are able to use it and the have-nots don't have access to it. So that is something we're working towards. We will have to navigate. We can soften that language between now and June 30th when we adopt it. But I think the caveat in there was to try to give control to the teachers who were struggling with it just as much as the students are as well.
I appreciate that. I just think in the way that I read it in this opens up a tremendous amount of ambiguity and inconsistency, which may magnify the problem. It's here to stay. It's only going to expand. We need to deal with it and have something uniform in place on that.
Totally agree. And as Dr. Daggett reminded us, this is it's only going to get more powerful going forward from this point forward. So to try to even And I think we're gonna have to be careful how we phrase whatever policy it is, because this is the weakest it's going to be, just exponentially, as we all know. It's just going to increase the power as we go forward. So I think it won't hurt to have some bumpers in place with that. But at the same time, things like plagiarism, academic integrity, those are never gonna go out of style, which I know you agree with. It's just, how do we use it as a tool for good?
Moving on to item 2.01, the proposed 2024-25 budget presentation and public hearing. Mr. Corbin?
Phone a friend? And if you want to start?
Certainly.
All right.
Well, as the board knows, you adopted the budget at the last meeting. All the requisite notices have been put together thanks to Mr. Corbin's efforts, as well as others in our Capital Region Communications Department from both Capital Region BOCES has put the district budget newsletter out to the public. As you know, the budget is driven by our vision and mission. It's something we take very seriously in terms of how we organize our programming, and basically around 4 core organizational values we call priority areas. And that includes our commitment to teaching and learning, a positive school environment, service learning and community partnerships, in addition to fiscal capacity and responsibility, something we are seeing other districts struggle with at this time. So anything we do, whether we zig or whether we zag, should make sure that our budget, our goals, our intentions, there's an intentionality that it ties back to our core vision, mission, and organizational values. As the board knows, every year we update our strategic plan. It's something that's been emulated by other school districts, even our local BOCES. And if imitation is the highest form of flattery, I take it. Our posters are around, and certainly they don't have the devil in the details. That's provided with our building action plans that you hear every autumn as we go forward, but certainly the overall strategic plan constantly pushes out 3 years. Goals drop off as they're accomplished, new goals are added on as identified by the board as well as by the buildings. It's definitely a dialogue. It's a discourse that is not just top down but bottom up as well. And the new initiatives that as we've dealt with in terms of our program goals is certainly, as the board identified this winter, clearly communicate and implement a plan for personalized learning. As you'll hear in my superintendent's report, I just returned from a national summit, invitation only, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, thanks to the efforts of the Grable Foundation and Remake Learning. And it's just exciting seeing what other districts are doing. I know some of our own faculty have participated on tri-state visits and seeing what changes in the landscape are occurring in schools that are part of the tri-state consortium, and certainly I think it all ties together. You're going to hear later tonight a presentation from our subcommittees for the district DEI committee, and as I will close that presentation, if you will allow me to foreshadow, they will be partnering with the mental health task force that's running on a parallel track. And I just think the power and collaboration between both of those teams will be important. And part of that is that personalized learning path. You are seeing districts starting to delve into options for assessments, finding different ways for students to be able to demonstrate their understanding rather than a one-size-fits-all model. The second goal there, leveraging data from the surveys, whether it's by mass or our school culture and climate surveys, we want to be able to give ourselves some flexibility thanks to the efforts of Amy Evans in our district office. We're looking at a panorama software that other districts are using as well, and that's going to give us some flexibility, whether it's school climate and culture or biomass screeners, to be able to customize what we've been doing as we go forward and drill down into certain areas that are of concern for us as we go forward. And then goal 3, and I know this is important to the board members. I know they met last week in talking about selecting at least one recommendation from the DEI and the mental health committees and task forces for the upcoming year. I think success breeds success, and it's going to be important to establish both of those committees going forward. It's not going to be a quick fix, and we're certainly going to need the power of the community behind it. I believe our district clerk put in your backup information on the Thursday letter this week. Even though I was out of town, you see the draft of the parent and family survey, which I think raises a few things that we should be paying attention to as we go forward. So certainly the work of our committees is very important and critical, but I also know we've got to be in for the long haul. There's not a quick fix in there, and certainly the parent and family survey echoes that and lets us know that there is a lot of work to be done. And then finally, developing and communicating a prioritized plan for not only district facilities and zero emission buses, but we've also talked about the school start times, choreographing that in concert with our capital improvement project work that's going on at the high school right now. And we look forward to sharing more with you and the community as we go forward. And then last but not least are our infrastructure needs. There's a lot of work that has been done, and we're very proud of the work that's been done, including our capital transfer projects, thanks to the work of the Facilities Committee. Smaller efforts. We've used money to infuse HVAC systems, especially following the pandemic, when money could be earmarked for that. And then certainly the projects at Wellwood and now at the high school, those renovations are going to allow us to change things like the school start time and for the entire district. And certainly the high school's completion will be the linchpin for that. Needless to say, with $161 million on the building condition survey, there's more work to be done. This is just, I think, an important first step, and just like the DEI and the mental health committees, letting success breed success, I think there's additional work that has to be done as we tackle some of the other buildings. So, as far as the budget development process, I'll turn it over to Mr. Corbin at this part to go through that.
Thank you, Dr. Tice. So this will represent our budget hearing, which is basically the culmination of the budget process. So I'll be going through and talking about some of the stuff that Dr. Tice already talked about, and then we'll also have time for questions and things of that nature. So the process itself, as you can see, starts in November, budget guidelines, established December with meetings with admin and supervisors, February being administrative component, March 11th, the capital component, March 25th with program transportation revenue, April 15th, the overall budget summary and the adoption, and then this evening being the budget hearing, and then the budget vote being on May 21st. From a components perspective, you can see here in the pie chart, you can see that on the right-hand side, program representing the largest portion at about 75% or 83 million. Capital representing 18 million or 16%, and administrative being the smallest part at 10 million or about 9% of the budget. From a comparison perspective, you can see here in 23-24 to 24-25, admin program and capital, admin program and capital as far as the increases over to the right, and then at the bottom being the main point being staffing and program, no cuts to either program or staffing. Anything with salary increases, you'll see me talk about it this evening, being contractual salary increases are either negotiated or forecasted at this point in time. And I'll talk more about that as I keep going. Capital budget, again, representing $824,000 increase or 4.8%. represents again the $18 million as far as the overall budget. Administrative, $722,000, again, smallest part of the budget, so any increase there generates a larger percentage, 7.8%. Overall, smallest part of the budget at $10 million. Program, largest part of the budget, increase of about $4.7 million. It's a 6.1% increase. Overall, again, $83 million. And again, that main point being no cuts to program or staffing, which includes mental health staffing and services. And I'll talk about that as well as I go through. So mental health services, this is something we didn't really show in the beginning, kind of as we went through things. Last year was more of a primary driver in the cost perspective, where last year what we did from an increase in services impacted the budget in that aspect. This being more of just kind of talking about what we are providing from mental health services. So you can see in the top part what we've got from a support staff perspective. You can see there family school liaisons with 6 of them, 1 at each school. Counselors, 13. Elementary schools, 1 at each building. Middle schools, 2 at each building. And the high school having 6. Psychologists next with 7 of them, 1 at each building, and then district level. And then you can start seeing some of the partnerships we've got. So with Contact Community Services, we're continuing with our suicide safety and mental health educator with Will DeSantis, continuing with our student assistance program with drop-in clinics, working with Dr. Carmen with the RFP she's done with us, and the CNY mental health counseling services. And then as you get to the bottom, being the Tier 1 student engagement specialist with Promise Zone, Fayal, Enders Road, and Mott Road. And then at the bottom being a RISE on-site therapy clinicians at the high school, Wellwood, and Eagle Hill. So expenditure, if you take everything basically and put it into a summary form, this would basically be the slide for that. So overall, you can see basically 5 main points. Salaries being the first, $3.1 million. Negotiator forecasted contracts, these are something that I would call, I think Dana talked about it maybe either last year or this year in regards to being a fixed aspect of it, where it's a negotiated or forecasted. Health insurance and benefit costs being similar kind of concept with increased rates with ERS, TRX being basically a fixed rate portion. We have an increase of $200,000 related to building security upgrades, and that was really related to panic buttons, intrusion system, and things of that nature, and I'll talk a little bit more about that through the capital project. BOCES was another increase, $700,000. We had an increase in education programs, software, hardware, things of that nature. And then the last one being gas and electric. That increase was basically due to NISMIC. We had a contract with them, I think around 2017. That contract expired. At that point in time, electric and gas rates were much cheaper, to the point where I think electric rates have doubled, and now we're at about a $300,000 projected increase. So overall, if you take those 5 components, it represents about $6.3 million, and that's essentially kind of really what's driving that expenditure increase. So the budget on a 5-year trend, you can see the first year, 2021, think of it more probably in the isolated area of like a COVID related. It's 2.82 increase, so less spending, less things going on from a COVID perspective. You have that amount, and then from 21, 22 forward, it really is hovering kind of around that 6% mark overall from a budgetary perspective. The budget overall broken out, I think this is what you kind of see in the budget program, and this is the program portion, and this is basically broken out from instructions aspect. You can see again down at the bottom, about $83 million overall in the bottom right, increase of around 6% overall. You can see the remaining 2 areas being administration and capital, those corresponding amounts, and then that grand total at the bottom being $111 million with a budget, overall budget to budget at 5.99%. Revenue, basically similar in the concept of with the pie graph here, you can kind of see how it's made up. Tax levy, the green portion, represents about 65%. So overall revenues are 65% made up with property taxes. State aid being the second largest with the blue at about 31%, other revenue at 4%. So state aid, you can see there in the middle, last year at 32.1 million, it accounts for approximately about 30% of FM revenues in 23-24. In 24-25, it was projected to be 34 million, an increase of about 1.9 or 5.9%, and that would account for approximately 30.7% of FM revenues, and I'll talk about what's driving that. So state aid, you can see on the left-hand side the categories, foundation aid being first, and then you can kind of see down through with BOCES, high cost, instructional materials, transportation, and building. So foundation aid is really more of a formula-based aid. That number we projected at $1,070,000 actually came in about $230,000 to $250,000 less. So we're really sitting somewhere around $850,000, give or take, in foundation aid. And that's based on everything in the formula from wealth ratio to enrollment and things of that nature. And again, it's a formula-based aid. The other ones, like BOCES aid, for instance, it's basically services. So we talked about expenditures with that $700,000 increase. As BOCES expenditures go up, the following year, the corresponding aid ideally flows, and you get that increase in aid. So there's that $423,000 projected there. You can see transportation aid, the big thing being last year we talked about was UPK, additional routes, things of that nature. So as transportation cost increase, that corresponding aid flows. And the last one being a little bit of anomaly, being building aid. So if you think about the capital project, the high school, as that project gets closed out in the near future, I should say a couple of years, at that point, the corresponding final cost reports would be submitted, and then that corresponding aid would flow at this point. So at this point, it's just basically a project where you've got expenditures going, but you don't have the corresponding aid until it's completed. At that point, you'll see that flow at a later point in time with that. Property taxes being the next area, you can see 23-24, the levy was 70 million, and you can see in parentheses there at 3.82%. So last year the cap was 3.82. We actually went out at 3.82, and that generated about 2.58 million. This year the cap is 3.52, and you can see that line below that being the increase. We're proposing to go out at 3.49%, represents $2.45 million. And then the bottom one being the impact. So if you take an example on a $100,000 home assessment, it represents about $37. So that projected cost was using prior year assessments and equalization rates at that point in time. I think what's happened is assessments have been received by most folks. I have talked to some different things from internally from staff to I've had a couple presentations at the building level, and we've talked a little bit about it. I did talk to Pat Duffy, the assessor, and just kind of said, I'm going to be talking in our case from the actual levy impact and things of that nature, and maybe if there's anything I could share, to the folks. So the way I understand it, Pat said I think 87% of the district, Fayetteville-Manlius, has been reassessed. He didn't give me an exact percentage overall of what went up, but I'm thinking it's probably not too far from that number, because most everything went up. So I said, how do you describe it? At Tully, I had 8 different townships in there, so those different townships with assessors, at some points they would go through, some would go through and reassess periodically, some would be consistent and do it annually. Pat said that's not the scenario here. It has done. We are at 100% equalization rate, things of that nature. What's driving it is basically home sales. It's 2 things. Home sales being the fact of what people are asking for they're getting, or there's a bidding war going on. Part 2, he said the folks that maybe aren't doing anything, maybe interest rates is impacting them where they don't want to do anything. Some of those folks are doing improvements on those homes, and the assessed values are going up on those. So he said basically those 2 things would be in a nutshell how he described kind of where he's at with overall assessments. I think for a number purpose, I've kind of estimated somewhere talking to him at 10. I think it's come in higher than 10% for some folks, where it's probably even in some cases up to 15 to 20%. So I know it does vary. I do know it's significant. I think there's even an article maybe I've read locally in Syracuse.com kind of talking about it, but I did have a chance to talk to Pat, and that was kind of the information I got from there. I think I did have one person call up, a community member, and just kind of wanted to understand the roles of the school as well as the assessor. And we talked about the fact that we don't do anything to do with assessments. We have the tax levy and then it's spread. I said the good news is, if there is any kind of good news, silver lining is the fact that it's almost like, I said, a dinner bill, in the sense of a bunch of people go out to dinner and there's more people that come in to pay for it. You essentially can lower what you actually owe, but that would depend on, the piece of it being of who got reassessed and things of that nature. And I said, I don't know that info. But the basic thing, as I explained to the community member, was, we don't do anything from assessments with the school. We did go down from 3.82 last year to 3.49 this year. And unfortunately, it's just the home sales are kind of the way they are. Are there questions about that one? That was one I kind of had a couple of questions at the building levels and stuff. Okay.
Yeah,
Brad,
the only thing, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Dan.
The only thing I would point out is that across the district, we're not, even after the reassessments in the town of Manlius, at 100% equalization rate, because the other towns haven't done reassessments, like town of Pompey hasn't done reassessments.
Correct.
So some of the district is at 100% equalization rate.
Correct.
some
Manlius
not.
is really where I was focused. Yep, you're right. Good point. Jason?
So, yeah, Brad, so I just wanted to emphasize just a point that you made, and I think it's good for the community to try and understand this best they can. So we can't, with a silver bullet tonight, tell you exactly how much your school taxes may go up or go down this fall, because we don't know what your individual home was assessed at.
Correct.
What I can tell you is that just because your home assessment went up 10%, does not mean your school tax bill or your town tax bill is going up 10%. It all depends, to your analogy, and I liked it, was how is it spread and how many other people are at the table and what did their assessments go up. So I don't want folks to get sticker shock because we all got those letters in the mail and my property was one of those that went up a fair percentage, but understand that doesn't mean your school tax bill goes up that same percentage. If we all go up the same percent in the town, I think to emphasize what you've got on the slide there, Brad, it's $37 per 100,000 of assessed value, provided that we all went up the same percentage.
Correct.
Great. Thanks so much, Brad.
No, good points. So next we'll go to other revenue. This is, again, smallest part of the budget, represents about $4 million. You can see there some of the components, and I'll talk about that in more detail. So you can see here in other revenue, there's about four main ones that really kind of drove it. Interest income being the first. You can see it's the second one down. $700,000 budgeted in 23-24. We've increased it for about $1 million. Basically, we weren't sure with interest rates in the previous year. Those interest rates have kind of held. We're thinking at this point they are going to be consistent from that aspect. So it's more of a true up of budget to actual from that aspect to add that $300,000 of projected revenue. And if you go towards the bottom, you'll see donations. I think it was a one-time solar pilot deal where we had actually received in that donation amount of $365. It was a one-time deal again. And in that sense, basically, we're not budgeting forward for 24-25. We've received the money. That corresponding solar pilot has been received. So use of reserves and assigned fund balance. These are really the two that I would focus on to kind of talk about when you're going to talk about other revenue that's driving it. So use of reserves, you can see at $250,000 in 23-24. That's the amount of reserves we're going to utilize towards the budget to balance the budget. That goes up to $1,099,000. Now, as part of that $1,099,000, there's portions of basically three reserves funding that's in there. So there's $860,000 of reserve funds that's going to be used to offset the $15.4 million capital project that I'll be talking about. There's also some money for retirement, so we'd be using our EBLAR reserve, and then there's another piece of it towards the Mott Road project that'll be used for that portion. So those are basically isolated things where it's that situation where you've got the capital project going, or you've got the actual thing with the portion with Mott Road, things of that nature, where they're one-time anomalies from that aspect. The assigned fund balance is really the one that's kind of driving it from that aspect. So if you look at last year, you're $69,150. And that's an anomaly because we were at 3.82%. Last year, we talked about whether or not we raise it up to the full 3.82 of the cap, or do we use assigned fund balance to balance the budget. Last year, we made the decision to go forward to the higher amount with the cap, and then we went to that portion, so the $69,000 was a lesser amount that actually we utilized for assigned fund balance. This year, we're going down to 3.49%. So basically, we've had to take the $1,067,000 to balance the budget. So if you take up all the revenues, you take all the expenditures, what are you left with to balance the budget? That's the amount of fund balance that's to be applied to actually balance that budget from that aspect. For a district our size at a $111 million budget, this is really a very small amount. I was lucky where I got the chance to look at some of the other districts and what they're using to balance it from reserves as well as assigned fund balance. We're pretty small. I can tell you at Tully on a $25 million budget, we were well in the maybe 250 to 400,000 mark pretty consistently. My goal would try to be somewhere around that $1 million to 700,000. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable from that aspect that we're able to balance the budget in that way. So overall revenue, similar to expenditures, a one-page summary to kind of explain everything. You can see three main points there. State aid, $2.1 million, foundation aid, transportation aid, and BOCES aid. Property tax levy, again, that 3.49%, last year being 3.82, represents about $2.4 million. Other revenue with fund balance and user reserves, which I just talked about, being that $1.8 million. So if you add up those three components, that gets you to your $6.3 million to offset those increase in expenditures of about $6.3 million. So tax levy on a 5-year trend, you can see in 2021, 3.3%. You get the anomaly years with COVID related being at 1.1 and 1.8. Last year going out at 3.82, and then this year decreased down to 3.49. Next, you're going to start seeing some of the propositions that are additionally on the budget. This case would be the bus purchase one. I'll talk about this one in probably a little greater detail given last year. So this year we're proposing 6 71 passenger diesel school buses. That would go out at $1.2 million for the proposition. You can see an asterisk there we have at the bottom to kind of talk about what the impact would be if this would be voted down. I think last year we passed by about 6 votes. So this is just to try to give folks a little bit of insight in regards to what would happen. So if the bus proposition is voted down, then the district would use current diesel buses for another year. i.e. the buses we plan to be retired would need to keep being used for another year, and it probably costs more to keep older buses working effectively. So basically, you're keeping something almost past its life of obsolescence from that aspect. So I kind of refer to it as quote unquote a coin slot. When does something turn into the point where you're putting more money into it? So everything from body work onto it to how efficient it is from diesel perspective, mileage, things of that nature, that's kind of where you're at. For FM purposes, we go on a 10-year cycle. At the end of that 10th year is basically where those buses are turned in, and that would be in this scenario. I'm going to talk a little bit more about buses. So the electric bus initiative, this is something we've spent a lot of time with. We've worked with folks from National Grid. We've worked with a third-party group called Polera. They came out, they did a survey for us, or a fleet analysis, I should say, and some of the information from that's going to be included here. So in the fall, we did two presentations, one in the morning more for local districts, and then in the evening we did one for more FM and community. So here's some of the stuff that we had learned. So the current fleet represents about 64 buses, includes 13 spares. Polera came through and they did this fleet and route analysis and basically taken our topography, what we have for current routes, things of that nature, what we have for our enrollment, and try to project out and determine what would be basically could be electric. So as you can see there, it determined that about 32 out of the 51 bus routes can be electrified. So that remaining 19 routes would, at this point, I'm assuming the distances are too great for those electric buses to do. So I'm guessing it'd probably be a situation where you'd probably take those routes, cut them in half, and apply 2 buses to it. So you'd have to hire 20 more drivers, you'd have 20 more buses in the current fleet, and then at that point, that's how you would solve that fully electrified for those main routes, if they have those existing routes that way in the future. Other issues or things to talk about, parking at the main site being limited or would need an additional space. Basically, the speech I've talked to Assemblyman Sturpey, or I've talked to our local district BOCES, or even at the point where we've had some of our road shows. Our issue, I don't really think is really an electric bus issue, is more as I would call it a parking or a facility issue. So basically, we've got a 10-year-old bus garage that's down there. It's working great. We've had a lot of folks there. We have presentations there. Everything we need is there. And our issue is the fact of is what we've got for spacing. So you got the road in front of it. You got private property on the one side. You got Wellwood on the other. The only thing you're limited to then is the back, which you're going to start getting into fields. At this point, it's kind of like what I tell my wife or anybody that asks. It's kind of like Wegmans or Walmart from the aspect of trying to walk between, the buses. It'd be similar to a parking lot aspect there. There is not a lot of room. So to add whatever we're going to need from a charging stations to potentially having to add 20 more buses from the 64 to get to 84, you're going to have to go to additional space, and the only place I can see going is going to be back into some of those green areas. If you're not doing that, then the buses are going to get located somewhere else at a different facility. I don't know where that is. You'd ideally try to have probably a garage where you have the buses, because any kind of maintenance work, things of that nature, you probably want it in the same facility. But I don't know how you get rid of a 10-year-old bus garage that's working great to then abandon it to go to something where you just need more space. So as I told Assemblyman Sturpey and others, ours is really more of an electric bus use than it is to really a facility use, and how do we do that? So some of the questions that have come up from everything be like, what other options are there? At this point, I'm not aware of that the governor has something in the legislation that allows for hybrids. I don't even know if they exist, to be honest, from that aspect, to where maybe we wouldn't need as many charging stations to use that spacing, or even something maybe like hydrogen fuel cell. I know Central has buses that has that. I know tractor trailers that have been using it, things of that nature. Ideally, we don't need then those charging stations to that capacity. It's more of a green initiative in the fact of not leaving that carbon footprint. But at the same time, maybe we keep that same facility we've got in the same parking area, and we can still have the 64 buses with the 51 routes in that way. But as far as I understand it, I don't believe that the legislation that's out there allows for hydrogen fuel cell. I know there's talk this summer. I'll go out to Saratoga. I'm sure this is going to be a very big topic with other districts, and are there options to go out for that and go into that, as an alternate. But at this point, I'm not aware of anything if there was. So I'm kind of hoping that's something maybe they can see as another alternative. Additionally, to electrical infrastructure, basically the analysis that went through, there would be significant upgrades that would be needed from the service aspect, from the pole to the service entrance, et cetera. I think at this point we had them out there. We were fortunate enough to have an engineer there from Polera. I think at this point they said with our panel, we have enough to have basically one full-size bus and one small bus there. And we're going to need, in our case, 64 to 84, somewhere in that ballpark. So that tells you some of the upgrade from that aspect. From a cost perspective, basically a diesel bus at this point is estimated from the latest quote I got was somewhere around $200,000 for a 64 large bus. It's $509,000, I believe, for a similar size electric bus. So a difference of about $300,000 there. From a funding perspective, I didn't put this down here, but from a funding perspective, the way I understand it, we don't, FM, I should say, doesn't qualify anything from a need-based funding. Any funding that we'd be receiving would really be more of other options. And at this point, I think the last I talked to Polera about, it was somewhere in that 40% range. So take whatever our costs are, and then 40% of that would be that corresponding number. I don't know what that means for future aspects of, for the second round of bus purchasing. I know there's a lot of questions, as you can see in the next steps, everything from battery life and things of that nature. So is that real cost of the bus really only going to be $500,000 and 40% of that, or is there really going to be a secondary cost if that battery you can only go for some kind of less than 10 years, which is our cycle. I know with the topography and things of that nature with the route, we have reached out to other districts, everything from Gage-Chilai to Bethlehem and other ones. And the way I understand it, they might have had initial thoughts at maybe even up to 180 miles, and they're getting closer to 100 during winter season with drag for anything from basically weather related to things of that nature. So that battery life, if you're putting, the way I understand it, a full-size charger on it instead of a trickle charger on it, then it actually would reduce the battery life, and therefore probably that battery life you're going to buying more than one for the life of that bus. So the costs are really at a point where I don't know exactly what they would be. It depends on those types of scenarios, but it's probably going to be higher than $500,000. And from a funding perspective, I'm not sure on all that. Next steps, you can see I've already talked about a lot of it, but additional clarification regarding grid capacity, cost of buses, charging stations, facility upgrades, distance limitations, battery life, and purchase timelines, et cetera. Are there questions there? I know there's a whole bunch. I talked to, I think, the sports boosters, and we had some good dialogue back and forth, kind of going through some stuff there and trying to give them some insight. I think some of the stuff was really the big one people weren't aware of, was it's electric or bus per se, and the fact of not having that capability with hydrogen fuel cell or hybrids or things of that nature. Right there.
I'm sorry. We appreciate all that you've done, and we have had many discussions about it, and I think it's just really important that people understand that the board very much wants our children riding safe, carbon-free buses. It's just the facts are right now, we don't have the funding and we don't have the infrastructure. But, I mean, lots of us drive hybrid and electric cars. We believe in it. We want to move forward. But I worry that people think that we're not interested. We are interested. But as you said, Fayetteville-Manlius will not be in any, I can't foresee, be getting any of these grants that are being bandied about, right? We haven't so far qualified, so. But I thank you for all that you've done. This is a lot of information.
Sure.
Brad, I think another piece to mention is, I know sometimes community members see, if you ever drive on any of the roads during school time, there are a ton of traffic and a lot of parents are dropping off their children. And so sometimes we get the question of, well, do we really need all of the buses that we have? And so that is New York State's law, that we have to be able to transport every single child, and in case of any emergency, we have to have, so we can't just decide if we don't want any more buses to eliminate some from the crew, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to take that and expand it as well. So that's accurate, 100%. You got to count for every student, every child in the district. The other one I've talked about, and I probably should have said as part of our meeting when we had the actual the fall, festivities there, the secondary, the news was out there, and we had one of our bus drivers there. I think the topic came up of how does FM handle currently with diesel and being ready if there's an emergency basis. And the way I understand it is we carry, I think, a half tank of gas for every bus, so God forbid anything that ever happens. So everything from a weather-related or the quote-unquote God forbid, type of situation, basically we're ready to be mobile and evacuate from that aspect. Some of the aspects, if the fleet analysis route gets you to 32 out of the 51. I'm guessing some of those have probably expended most of that electricity to do whatever that route was. So if you did get to that quote-unquote God forbid type status, and it's fairly, not too long after those buses return, I don't imagine they're probably going to be at a point where they're charged enough to where they're going to take on a full route again to turn around and drop everything off. So that was one of the concerns from our drivers, from the aspect, if we're going to maintain ours from a safety aspect of where we have half a tank of gas, are you going to be able to somehow guarantee us that we're going to have enough capacity electricity-wise for that quote-unquote God forbid moment? And that's something I don't really know how to answer, but I'm guessing every district's probably feeling that same way, because we all know kids and safety are our priority from that aspect. So coupled with that, yes, we got to have one for every student, but at the same time, even with our own district running half a tank of fuel to make sure we can transport kids home, that's another question we've got from the electric aspect. Are there other questions?
Yeah, just quickly, so when you talk to our legislative delegation and hydrogen fuel cell, is that something that they're actively talking about? And I imagine other school districts, I know everyone is having the same issues that we're having. So
Yeah.
is that something that's really been talked about at the state level?
So I had the good fortune where we went out to a couple different events where we had either a representative from New York State ASBO or my group, the Association of School Business Officials, or we've actually had delegates from the New York State that were on, listening and trying to answer feedback. And one of the main questions was, are there alternatives to just full-blown electric, i.e. the hydrogen fuel cell? The way I understand it, they are looking at it. I think some of it's probably storage. Where is the hydrogen? Where is it going to be from that aspect to receive it? Is it something geographically that can be done somehow to figure out how that works? The way I understand it as well is I think Assemblyman Sturpey talked about maybe some different opportunities with it. I do believe we actually have something coming up, I think it's this week, where he's going to be present. We'll be able to, provide some more of these questions and get some more feedback on that. Okay. Rebecca, did you have something?
I was just going to add that in terms of the next steps, we're just watching also closely to see that the prices go down. And this technology for buses is still pretty new, and the amount of manufacturers are still pretty limited. So from a consumer standpoint, we're looking to make sure we're investing in vehicles that are going to have that battery life, that the distance that we need them to carry our students. And I think it sounds like there's still not the best products out there. So we're also going to be looking closely to see as new vendors come into the marketplace.
Yeah, I think I dated myself in the sports boosters where I started mentioning Miami Vice and the phones and, things of that nature and the size of them from seeing it from back in the mid 80s, for those of us that are that age level. I don't know, kind of what I was talking about technology wise, if you think about that, laughing, but think about the size of the phones and everything like that. Now with the capability you have in your own phones, that's kind of one of the magic lines you're going to hear a lot was technology is going to evolve. The problem is I don't know, some of the folks, do you want to have the mid 80s, bus that's out there with that technology, and maybe it's going to be so limited versus what we're going to have. But as far as one that evolves from, from a futuristic aspect to have that technology to where it's kind of doing everything you want it to, and you don't have that quote unquote first generation, I think that's kind of what folks are also looking into. Is that battery going to be able to last much longer? And from that aspect, and maybe we get rid of to where we can go all 51 and we're going to be ready to go on the emergency thing. But at this point, that's, I think we've done pretty much everything I think we can do to try to gather data to provide that everybody to, at least here's kind of where we're at and from other options, but everything else, that's a lot of it, and unfortunately, is a lot of the same questions we asked a year ago are still those same questions. How long is the battery? How much is it going to cost? When's technology going to advance to, things of that nature, where they've even got further this year probably into fires and some of the stuff where originally we thought we'd keep everything maybe at some kind of a storage facility and go at that route to where people have seen probably some of the stuff they've had from Chicago to Toronto or whatever, where they had issues with that. And how do we handle that from a fire protection? I don't know. It's one of those, I'm not sure how to best do it, but our point really, I just know with the facility wise is really the spacing at this point, and I don't know how to solve that without something changing. Are there other questions?
Yeah. But I wish people understood how much time and effort's been put into this behind the scenes, and I really wish more had come to that town hall that we had at the bus garage that you did. It was super enlightening, super educational. I actually came away from that with two things that were not from those who were presenting, but from those who were there. One you touched on, which was the concern of our bus drivers, that they don't go below, as you said, a half a tank, because if something happens, they don't want to be stuck on the side of the road with a busload of students unable to move that bus, and it becomes a safety thing. Or if they're beneath that and we have an emergency or urgency at the schools where we need to evacuate a school building and we don't have buses that can get there. The drivers who were in attendance that night we're super concerned about that.
Yep.
And the second was from our maintenance folks. And, you know, I think that there was a perception last year if people voted down the bus purchase, that we would then immediately purchase electric buses. And you've been very clear that if this is voted down, we're just going to keep older buses on the road longer. And one of the things that our mechanics were very clear about that night was that the new buses, though still diesel, are significantly more efficient than our 10-year-old diesel fleet.
Correct.
So we may not be going to electric this year, but with the new bus purchases, we are still moving toward a more efficient, cleaner fleet than running 10-year-old, 11-year-old diesel buses that, as Daryl mentioned, we're replacing them because they're not necessarily as safe as this district would want them to be, and the families in this district would want them to be for their students on those buses. And then the last thing is just, I don't think you raised it, is, correct me if I'm wrong, but the number that we've talked about to electrify our bus fleet was last ballparked at about a $40 million price tag. So when we talk about what the tax increase is of the current budget increase, it's $40+ million to electrify our fleet. And we don't currently have that funding in this district that I've been able to find.
Yeah.
So you hadn't mentioned that number. I just want to.
I was trying to scare everybody.
It's not a scare. It's a reality. I mean, that is what the number is. So, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
No, you're right. Every one of the points you made, that's accurate. From a costing perspective, I know some folks are going to say, you know, what are you going to have from funding? And the problem is at this point with the need-based, and that's just unfortunately not FM, but beyond that, being at that point where the 40% level, there's going to be, you know, whatever that portion is times the number of buses. With our case, as those batteries are with those routes or whatever, the wild card is it's 20 more buses. But on top of that, it's 20 more drivers, because somebody's got to drive these things. So now you're going to go find 20 more drivers, the corresponding legacy cost tied to that. You're going to have a route management system put in place from that aspect. And then on top of it, really being the big one, is that half tank of gas comment. That's probably my biggest fear. It's probably your biggest fear as well, because I know, I mean, that's why we're here, is to safeguard the biggest asset, and that's the kids. So that's the one I would like answered before we go forward, before anybody, is going to be, if I would expect you guys to ask me, how are you going to offset that half tank of gas to make sure if he calls something, we go, and we're going to get everybody home safe? That's the number one question. And once we can answer that, I think everything else falls in line. So, yeah. Angeline?
Thank you, Mr. Corbin, for the presentation. I was just wondering, it seems that there's a lot of information, both like going on in the board meetings and like among like the school districts on e-buses. I was wondering to better inform the students if there were already existing like brochures or web pages that could help inform them.
I think there's information out there. The piece I think that I struggle with is there's information, but I don't know if there's the complete answers. And that's the piece where, you know, to give it, I feel like you were kind of, we can provide, I think the PowerPoint and things of that nature we provided is actually online. The problem I don't have with some of it, though, is the answers to some of the stuff I've said here is like, for those students, am I giving you just questions, or am I going to give you corresponding answers, which I would expect you'd want to hear? So we can certainly guide them to different areas of where they have information or what's going to be needed, but some of it's going to probably be specific to FM. So for instance, that half tank of gas, I don't know if other districts do it. I would like to think they do something like that to make sure that they are in that place ready to go. So if those kind of information or ideas are out there, we could certainly talk about it, but we could, put forward anything that, the board felt comfortable with doing, whether it be the presentation, the route analysis, whatever that is. I'm open to, to sharing.
Thank you. It seems that a good idea would be to gather all, like the presentations and stuff into like one area so that the students can better access it and kind of compare the information. Is that true?
Okay. We can certainly look into that.
I was wondering if there was a way we could put some of that information out through Brojo or also on social media with some links to our website, because we know the students are very active on social media and a lot of them do watch the Brojo segments. So if we can try to target those, at least we might be able to reach a lot of kids.
I'm getting more and more technology savvy, having college students for daughters, so they keep reminding me, bringing me up. We can certainly do something. I know last year, I think we did get to the point where we did a little, I don't know if it was a 2-minute video or whatever we did do with Joe's help from AV, and we kind of put that out, so we could certainly revisit it, or if there's things we want to add, maybe that's an opportunity as well to get some information out there. So I know we've broached it with that. I think Dr. Tice and myself did something from that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would just be good even to just outline all the work that you've put into, like the steps and the questions that you've tried to engage either the manufacturers or the state level for questions, and what you found out or not found out, because I think that would be enlightening for all, whomever, to see that the district's doing its due diligence to really try to understand what's a responsible decision to make, and in terms of timing of when we would go that route, or not just doing it because, it's available right now, but making sure we're doing it at a time that's right and we have the technology that's ready and safe for our students. So maybe even just articulating like what has been done to date in a concise way, just so people know we're not just saying no, we're really trying to do a lot of good work to uncover the facts.
No, that makes sense, Sarah. It's one of those, definitely. I mean, nobody's here is just checking the box, quote unquote. I think on everything, there's been a lot of work done. I know I've had other districts reach out to us specifically and ask us how we've done it, who we've worked with for a third party. I've shared our presentations. I think I had at least 5 districts, including superintendents, come up to me after the fall one and specifically ask for our stuff because they were going to use it to share with their own districts. So we were actually at the leading edge, from the way I understand it from some of our bus manufacturing to top 10% in the state as far as how we were with gathering data and how we were sharing it. So it's a good point. We have put a lot into it. It's not like where we're kind of lagging behind or we haven't done our own homework. Yes, Cindy?
Kind of going back to what Dan said at that presentation at the bus garage, one of the drivers was speaking about when the kids are on field trips or they are on sporting events, where can they charge up the bus when they're away from home? And that was a real concern for that particular driver. A safety thing for where they can plug in, because it wouldn't be right at the school in particular, so they'd have to leave the kids and then go plug in somewhere else, if that is even available. And so I think Dan's right, listening to what their concerns were, and it was all about the safety of our kids. So, and I go back to what Daryl said, that is what is most important.
Yep. I think it ties into all of it, to be honest. It was one of those, it was kind of nice with the sports boosters the other night, because it reminded me of different things that maybe I hadn't revisited in my own mind, everything from sports. And some of it I went to Tully just because of the 10 years and talking about what they were going to struggle with. So for them, like for instance, Beaver Rivers is basically, I think, is a team they play frequently, but distance-wise, it's so significant, I don't know what they're going to do. From an FM purpose, I would think, as we get into states or things of that nature, you're going to run into, or co-curriculars, everything from Model UN or things of that nature if we're using a bus. How are we doing that? Where are we doing it? Are we now changing up who we're playing or what sectionals look like to states, to co-curriculars, et cetera? And we're going to get to the point where if we're going to change the bell schedule and if we're triple tripping or whatever we're going to do with that whole different thing is going to be something we're going to have to consider. So then it gets into that second line being down of 32 out of 51. I don't know if it's 32 anymore. Maybe that's a different number, a higher number, or whatever that looks like. So there's so many variables. So when we did talk to Polera, we just talked about how does this work when we do change that bell schedule? And he's like, I'm going to have to come back out and I'm going to have to do reanalyze all your routes and things of that nature, and we're going to put up new information to provide it. So even the data we've got, to Angelina's point, it's going to change, in the real, near future from that aspect to who we are and what we're doing at that point to kind of, basically talk about what's even capable from that aspect. So, yeah, that's some of the stuff. It's just so much, everything from academics to sports to everything else. It just impacts everything. So, okay. So the next item is the capital project proposition, $15.4 million capital project proposition that will include work at each of the district's 6 school buildings. This is something, just so folks know, and I've tried to explain this to some of the staff, things of that nature. It's not common to have a capital project proposition tied in. Normally you do it standalone, separate and distinct, but in our case, I hope folks have had a chance to see some of the pictures and some of the concerns we have from the garbage pails, I call them, at some of the building level with the water and things of that nature. So specifically from a project scope perspective, you can see there the partial roof replacements at the high school, Wellwood, Eagle Hill District Office. I know Wellwood, for instance, you basically had a project that was recently completed. Some of the questions I would think people are saying is, why wouldn't you be able to do all the roofs? In those situations, you had everything from priorities and alternates to as well as roofs that were still under warranty that weren't leaking at the point in time. It's partial roof replacement, so I tried to explain, in some scenarios, you've got roofing that where it was brand new and then it ties into something that was old. It's been triaged or bandaged at that point to try to keep it where it stopped leaking, but the more you go up and try to bandage it, the more in some cases, because it's so old and deteriorated, it's just not holding, and therefore you got areas that are brand new within Wellwood where you've got garbage cans trying to, collect rainwater from causing any more damage. Other areas we're going to be talking about with safety and security upgrades across all district buildings. And then there's HVAC or heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, control upgrades at Fayal, FM High School, maintenance building, and conference center. Another proposition, Fayetteville Library, as you can see there. We're going to have another one as well, being Manlius Library proposition. They're consistent every year, but again, it's collecting on behalf of the library, but that's their own thing, is separate and distinct from the school. Student board member proposition, so there'll be, I think this comes up every other year, and that's for an ex officio member of the Board of Education, similar to Angelina, so we'll have be graced with that through that proposition. And school board election, candidates for the Board of Election, we have 3 seats open. You can see there's 8 people running, and that'll be the order you'll see them on the ballot. So if the budget's defeated, here's some options here. So basically you can present the same budget to voters a second time, present a revised budget to voters, or adopt a contingent budget. And again, as you can see in the asterisk on the bottom, if a proposed budget is defeated twice, the board must adopt a contingent budget. So a contingent budget, what does that represent? So in our case, it'd be a 0% tax levy increase, but there are impacts with that. So everything from community use of facilities, outside groups paying full cost using facilities, capital expenditures, capital transfer related work would be impacted here, equipment, with most equipment that can't be purchased, and some salary increase impacts being prohibited for confidential employees, etc. Voter information, you can see here, budget vote May 21st at Wellwood Middle School. So it'll be different this year for folks, just as a reminder. A new place being at Wellwood, hours of 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Absentee and early ballots can be obtained from district clerk, and you can see the corresponding phone number there, and then corresponding voter qualifications, 18 years of age, FM district, U.S. citizen, etc. Next steps, budget vote itself on May 21st. Whoop, hit the wrong button. And at that point, questions?
Do we do the same thing that we do each year? So I've heard some comments from some community members about, we have this 5.99% budget increase.
Yep.
There's always this disconnect among some in the community for understandable reasons of not understanding tax rate versus tax levy. And Jason touched on this before.
Yep.
The portion of the budget that goes to the taxpayers in our community is the tax levy. We don't have control over tax rates because we don't control assessments.
Correct.
And the tax levy increase, the amount being billed to the taxpayers is not a 5.99% increase, it's a 3.49% increase.
Correct.
And so I just want to make sure we're very clear on that. That's the total increase to the taxpayers, and I think it was on your slide 23. It's the same range that it's been for the last 4 years. Nothing different on that. And on the overall budget, the total budget year-to-year increase is $6.3 million.
Correct.
5.1 of that coming from contractual obligations and health and benefit insurance increases that we have exactly zero control over, meaning that in the entire budget, the entire increase that we, in theory, have any control over, if we keep programs and staffing, which we have always remained committed to doing,
Sure.
the total increase that we actually have control over is $1.2 million, less than 1% of the entire budget. So just to keep this in perspective for anybody that is listening to this, the budget increase is contractual and matters that are out of our control, if we are maintaining staffing and programs, which this community has been very consistent in wanting us to do for the education of the students in this district. So just, we have that discussion each year. And then I want to just say one more thing on this capital improvement project. We've talked about the leaks in our classrooms and the fact that we have buckets and water coming into the classrooms. Dr. Tice has communicated with us directly, but not as publicly, about what happened in the high school a week and a half ago. So just to be clear about that, there was a cabinet in one of our chemistry classrooms filled with all chemistry equipment, glassware, that came off of the wall due to water damage coming through areas that need roofing repairs.
Yep.
And fortunately, the students from that classroom were in an assembly at the time.
Correct.
The cabinets came down immediately where students would normally have been sitting, and there were glass shards that went across the entire classroom. We have to address these roofs. We don't have an option. This is not something that can wait for another year, another 6 months, another 9 months. If we're not taking care of the buildings so that we're providing safe learning spaces for our teachers and our students, then we're not doing our obligation to either of them. So it's not an optional project, it's a necessary project. I'll stop there.
No, good point. So everything you said was true. And the second one, I think, tying into, the fixed cost, that was one, I think I took it actually from you, where I talked about it being the fact of, that from that aspect being salaries as well as benefits, things of that nature. It is a fixed point. You really, there's negotiations that go on, et cetera, but for the most part, it's 3-year contracts. Those are fixed. ERS, TRS rates is fixed. So to Dan's point, it really is 1.2 of variable costs, you would call it, from that aspect. The capital project one, we have had good luck from the staffing as well as the PTO, things of that nature, talking about it. The good news is those guys, they're living it, from the Wellwood folks to the high school folks, and it was very easy conversation. You're right on what did happen recently. I was fortunate where I got a chance to go up Friday and meet with the high school principal as well as our director of facilities. Had a chance to talk to the teachers union as well as the building rep from that aspect, and it's something, they had concerns, obviously, like anybody else would, of kind of what are we doing about this? And it actually gave a nice little opportunity where I talked about facilities committee, and I talked about the fact of everything from the House One wall to other things, and I got a chance to talk about maximum cost allowance, and as Dr. Tice echoed, I think in the beginning of this thing, talking about $160 million of it. I said, frankly, there's more work, that we'd love to be able to do. It's just, how do we do it all? Where do you prioritize this? We talked about, with a building condition survey, how that originates. Everything from the architect coming in, and it's basically in 3 different time frames, 0 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, corresponding dollars with also future costs. I said, some of the things we struggle with, and I think it was Dan, I said, that brought it up himself. We've done $42 million at Wellwood, we've done $52 million at the high school, but yet we still have $160 million to do, and the math doesn't add up. So how do you do that? And that's some of the stuff I said we're facing. So I said everything in here, from the roofing, et cetera. It's not that anybody missed it in the sense of they weren't aware of it or things of that nature. It was a fact of, here's the money, here's how far it goes. Post-COVID, the costs have jumped up considerably. And from that aspect, I said, you're trying to address everything, but then you got to understand maximum cost allowance and state aid. I said, so with the high school having the House One wall, you know it more than anyone. We've been talking about it for a year, 10 months, whatever it's been. And it's $5 million. I said, you can go do it tomorrow. I said, the problem is you're not going to correspondingly go get the 8 out of that. So how do you go do something for $5 million and not take $4 million and apply it to $6.3 million is what our total thing is? I said, I think taxpayers, voters, community members would have a lot of heartache in the fact of it's $4 million. We could use that money for program resources, minimize tax impact, et cetera. I said, so it's kind of a trick in how you do it. The big thing is knowing, 1, you're aware of whatever it is. 2, how do you marry that up? I said, the good news is we've got long-range planning, we've got building condition survey, and we've been actively working at the facilities committee. I said, so I want that pipeline still continuing at the building level. Talk to the principal, talk to those folks, get it to the facilities committee. That facility committee, I said, takes that information, makes recommendations to the full board, and we have these discussions. And I said, so right now I'm feeling a lot better where we're at with getting it, but overall, yeah, we're chasing our tail a little bit with that $160 million from that aspect, but we're going to make a plan and we'll figure out how to do it. So, yeah. Are there other questions?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr.
Okay.
Tice. Thank you, Mr. Corbin. Oh, do you want me to open the hearing first? So is there a motion to open the budget hearing? Cindy, second from Daryl. And all those in favor indicate aye. Aye. No one's opposed or abstained. Okay, so now we could take any questions from the audience in regards to the budget. If you have any, you could come up to the podium to ask those questions. No? Okay. Okay. Is there a motion then to close the public hearing? Kelly, and a second from Cindy. All those in favor, please indicate aye. Aye, and no one's opposed or abstaining. So we will move on to item 2.02, presentation, the DEI committee recommendations. Dr. Tice?
Certainly, it gives me great pleasure to introduce members of our district DEI committee that are going to join us this evening. 4 subcommittees that worked on each of the tenets of the culturally responsive sustaining education framework. As the board knows, and those members that were part of the policy committee at the time, this is a requirement from New York State Board of Regents in terms of establishing a policy. Our board policy committee worked diligently for nearly a year, transforming New York State School Board's template policy to address our goals going forward. And I know in the culture wars and the rhetoric that is out there, it would lead one to believe that there was more to it than what is simply defined in the policy. And the goals that are identified in that policy are to provide equitable, inclusive, diverse opportunities for all students. And 2, to promote a culturally responsive education and working environment through ongoing learning, professional learning, and support. And you'll hear some of that this evening. We also worked hard taking an Erie 1 BOCES policy service policy and transforming it into our administrative regulation. Erie 1 BOCES, as you know, that provides a lot of detail in terms of the attorneys that work in that policy service, and they're the ones who identified the committee in terms of the different stakeholder groups that ought to be considered. And we put together a committee that I believe represents those stakeholders. We asked for volunteers as part of a community survey, community satisfaction survey, in one of our first annual reports. And we had, as you know, a vast number of community individuals indicate an interest in participating. We had to winnow it down to ensure that there was representation, K through 12, from different parts of the community, whether it be Fayetteville or Manlius, as well as from each of the representative buildings. And the job was to include stakeholders that included students, parents and guardians, district and building administrators, teachers, including at least one special ed teacher, support services staff, including at least one school psychologist and one school counselor, non-instructional staff, Board of Education representatives, and at-large community members. Now, I am very proud of this committee, and I say that not to be self-serving, because those of you that are on the committee know that I am not part of the committee. And the reason for that is the committee reports to me, and I report to the Board of Education, and I sit in the gallery. And I am tremendously impressed with their work over time. We've been meeting for more than a year and a half, and I think it culminated in our most recent meeting when the subcommittees practiced their presentation tonight in front of students, and the students were able to share their hopes and fears and dreams in a very safe environment. And we've been most fortunate to have 2 community facilitators, Dr. Ines Abdul-Malik and Dr. John Palmer from Colgate University. And I know when I was trying to twist their arm to participate, they wanted to make sure that this just wasn't another committee for the sake of having a committee. They wanted action, and they wanted to be part of that. And I think with their passion for the topic and the work of the committee, I do believe we have established a foothold. And I think there are some issues that we're going to have to address. I gave the board a sneak preview of the family and parent survey, school culture and climate survey, and I think there are things that we're going to have to work collaboratively together. As I said earlier, there's not a quick fix here, and it's going to, it's been a long time digging this hole, and I think it's going to take a lot of work together in order to provide opportunities for all as we go forward. And I am pleased with the fact that this committee will be partnering with our mental health task force, because I do believe there are elements not only from the DEI, but from the mental health that tie together, as well as instruction. Even the conference that I was just at in Pittsburgh all ties together in a very timely way. So I think we're going to have to work together as a community, as a school district, possibly redefining ourselves in a variety of areas as we go forward. But I think the end result is going to be a better district that is committed to those goals that I read earlier in terms of providing opportunities. So without further ado, I know we have board members. We have 4 board members on the DEI task force, some of which you'll hear tonight. We have some district office administrators, and we have a number of other stakeholders with us. So I don't know which subcommittee is going first. There you go.
I apologize for my voice. I got laryngitis for Mother's Day. Thank you for having me, first of all. My name is Dr. Jennifer Coppola, and I'll be representing the Welcoming and Affirming Environment Subcommittee. I have had the absolute pleasure of serving alongside my subcommittee co-members, Dr. Keontae Coleman, Elhana Carey Letters, Lisa Wade, and Daryl Wheeler. Our goal is to help create a more welcoming and affirming environment for all students across social locations and identities, and to help enhance the school environment in ways that all students and staff feel respected and treated with dignity. The culturally responsive, sustaining educational framework is a call for, for collective responsibility for cultural learning and relationship building. And in order to achieve this, we were tasked with designing an anti-bullying, anti-microaggression program, as this is a priority area for social change in our district. So first, a bit of background and some shared language for how we are defining bullying and microaggressions. We all probably have a good general understanding of what bullying is, but microaggressions are both subtle as well as overt actions that have considerable cumulative and long-term negative impact. Both bullying and microaggressions are considered public health problems. In the social and psychological research literature, there are well-documented associations between bullying and mental health outcomes, including more severe levels of distress. And you'll see that just a little bit of that information on the right-hand side. So this should shed some light on why this initiative is so important. Also, before getting into our recommendations, we thought it was important to lay out some program objectives. So because bullying and microaggressions are so prevalent, and because the existing bullying prevention programs out there that are available to us involve comprehensive and multifaceted approaches, we want all key stakeholders involved in this new program. We know that many teachers and staff embody the values of creating welcoming and affirming environments for students daily. We also have heard many firsthand accounts of aspects of the school environment where the work is not at the level that it needs to be. Student climate survey data also aligns with this. And so therefore, we want this program to be supportive in the sense that we can improve and learn from each other and also uphold and build accountability for doing this work. This program will not be an endpoint. It will not be a box to check. It will be an ongoing, continuous collaboration that requires assessment, education, monitoring, and reporting. And we also want to integrate with the current curricula wherever possible. We want to communicate and involve the community of caregivers that we have. We want to promote continuous self-growth. We want to ensure that this program is a priority across grade levels in school buildings, starting at the elementary levels and adjusting for developmental appropriateness and complexities of social environments at the middle and high school levels. So we have 6 recommendations for a comprehensive bullying and microaggression prevention program. The first is an inventory or assessment of existing strategies and social emotional learning programming. This is to identify gaps and opportunities for new program integration and also to prepare for this program to not necessarily all fall on the counseling department or the teachers for implementation. This work will be spread across school departments. So here's just a little bit of what we know already, and we need to add to this and make this more specific. The second recommendation is to understand current perceptions and experiences from the students and also from community members. The climate surveys are wonderful, and also they only give us snippets of information with regard to bullying specifically. So we really need to drill down to understand what's going on. We can actually do that pretty easily with some current survey instruments that you see listed in the green box on the right-hand side. There are some current survey instruments available, and we can also tailor these for our needs and also integrate some microaggression questions. The third recommendation is the implementation of this new prevention program. So we have 2 main areas, professional development, and the next slide is student development. We have identified some programs, you'll see again in the green box on the right-hand side, that are easily implemented and adaptable. We've also identified some microaggression training for staff, you'll see with perception.org. We want all employees to be included in this effort. So this should feel like we're all in this together because we deserve better kind of program. And we want teachers and staff to see this as an opportunity to create a calmer and more peaceful learning environment where everyone can feel safer. For student development, you'll see that we have, this is for all students, grouped by age cohort, obviously. You'll see that we have listed the same 3 program options, and that is because they cover both staff and student training. Students cannot learn if their psychological needs are not being met. And psychological needs include safety and security, a sense of belonging, and self-esteem. So that really is the main focus for any of these programs that we select. And we would expect the district to continue to research these programs and select something that fits their needs, again, integrating it into the current curriculum. The fourth recommendation is to engage with the community in a messaging initiative. Community involvement is important to improving school climate, and as such, it will be imperative to inform and educate and keep the community updated, as they are partners here as caregivers who are invested in psychological and physical safety and optimal inclusive learning. So we need to be transparent and share programs and data and educational resources across multiple mediums. Number 5 is annual metrics tracking and some evaluation and reporting. So we would expect that after initially understanding perceptions of students and community members, that we could then have year-over-year data for tracking. So we could look at reported incidents, in addition to the survey data, other reporting tools, and understand where we are improving and where we still need some work. And we would also want to look at this data by demographic. Last but not least, recommendation number 6, consider a district position. So because this is a substantial undertaking, having someone dedicated to being trained in the selected program, overseeing implementation, the surveys, tracking, reporting, and community messaging, it would be imperative to the new program's success. And we would also expect representatives from various key stakeholder groups to also be involved with this new position and perhaps work as a group. Hopefully I'm under time, but just in conclusion, I wanted to say that a bullying and microaggression prevention program is something that our district absolutely needs and deserves in order to address the incidents that are occurring and to begin to create a more welcoming and affirming environment. So we see this program as beneficial to all and also as a likely catalyst for both social change and improved mental health and wellness at our district.
Thank you very much. Questions from the board? Well, I'm glad to see the connection and the work being done, bullying and microaggressions, because a lot of time the microaggressions are left off the table, and it's just focused on the obvious bullying, when the microaggressions obviously can have the same impact on our students and our staff's mental health. So I'm glad to see that is going to be part of the work, or a recommendation for that to be part of the work.
I just have one question, and I think it's going to be the same for most of the subcommittees because I don't know the numbers. How many students are actually on the DEI committee, and are they represented on each subcommittee?
We had talked about that. We originally had 4, 1 from each class at the time, but we have talked not only for the mental health task force, but also for the DEI committee about having additional students. We've even talked about it, as Ms. Fang would tell us, even for representation here to support the student ex officio board member. And one of the things that I did witness in Pittsburgh is that they are having the students at the table as task forces take a look at curriculum. It's funny, the two of you should mention, Brojo and reporting out. They had student reporters at the conference in Pittsburgh interviewing us and taking it back and reporting it out, whether it's FM, Hornet TV. I mean, it's just brilliant in terms of getting the word out that I think the student voice, which I know is where you were headed with this, is underrepresented and underutilized. So that would be something that I totally agree that we have to have a stronger voice. But originally, to answer your question, there were 4 just to try to get a 40-member committee reasonable with everything else.
So there were 4, are there still 4? That's my first question.
I'm looking at our district clerk because we recruited as they graduated out.
And
Yeah.
2 or 3?
okay. All right. And just,
As you know, when we did the Wellwood Task Force, it was unwieldy. I mean, it was clearly more than 40 folks there, and you want voice to be heard, as you know, but you get to a point that a committee becomes too large to get anything done. So at this time, we kind of structured the committee to make sure we had all the stakeholder groups represented, but I just think, and what I saw in Pittsburgh was getting more students at the table is imperative, whether they're actually part of the committee or we can bring them in like the DEI committee did at the last meeting to try to get more dialogue and discourse happening.
so I appreciate that we have them, but it becomes the practical question of what can we do and when can we do to try to elevate the student voice in this. Not saying that there hasn't been, I'm not suggesting that at all, but it's just such a critical voice to this and the mental health committee side that it's this double-edged sword, right? We ask so much of our students already, their plates are full, but this is really important work that I know many of them would, if they knew more about the opportunity, might choose to participate in.
One thing that we did was we brought students in to share their experiences with the full committee. I think that's helpful to do because many students can't devote the time to come to the different meetings, but bringing them in for a particular meeting. And I think Dr. Tice is going to talk later about the possibility of having a student group associated with the board. So not replacing our student board member, but maybe having a cohort of students who are working more closely with the board on different issues. And that could be flexed around their time and their availability.
We're at a crossroads, as the board knows, as the faculty knows, as the administration knows. It came out of the superintendent's roundtable in Washington, and I think I shared it with some members of the board, that we assumed the chronic absenteeism with a lot of students was a result of the pandemic, but they're voting with their feet. They're just choosing. They need school to evolve as society has evolved. I mean, you and I were having an artificial intelligence conversation minutes ago. Schooling is going to have to evolve, and I know that's something we've all talked about, but the students need to help us chart that direction at the table. We're at a critical place. I mean, we all want something to be done. It was a board goal that we echoed earlier. I think the students would agree with us. I just think we have to include them and move forward.
I would only like to say that right from the beginning, I felt the students were very comfortable. They were equal partners in this committee. I really felt that they were comfortable to say anything on their minds. I was impressed. Of course, we'll figure this out.
But even the disclosure at the last committee meeting, they felt safe to open up. I mean, it was really touching to have them express their vulnerabilities and their beliefs, and I think it's one of those, Dr. Seuss moments that be glad that it happened. It was special. What's that?
Sorry, not to get off topic, but Jen, I did have a question on the presentation. So you listed them all out as separate recommendations, but the way that I read them, they're really one comprehensive recommendation, and maybe they're time phased based on capacity and rollout and those kinds of things. But I just wanted to clarify that with your group.
Yes, absolutely. It's meant to be cohesive. There are some things that would probably, need to happen initially. So perhaps, 1 and 2, recommendations 1 and 2 need to happen first, but then the community messaging initiative, I would suspect, gets going, and then, right? Yeah.
I have a question, sorry.
Sure.
Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, back to the, student representation topic. It seems like, at least according to the high school students that, I'm around every day, that, a lot of students are eager to have their voice in this issue. While I understand that, whittling down the members is important to, get the key voices out, I was wondering how plausible it would be if, similar to the board meetings, there could be, a small themed, maybe public comment session for the meetings to make it public so that people who find it necessary can make a comment.
Yeah, are you talking about the larger DEI committee? That might...
Yeah.
Yes, that could.
Or,
Dr.
yeah,
Hastings.
thank you.
Yeah.
Or we could, like I said earlier, like was done in Pittsburgh, have student reporters there, and then to report back with Brojo, from the Buzz. I agree. I mean, I think there are many opportunities to involve students, not only in capturing the news, but reporting it out too.
Not only in terms of reporting the news back to students, but also having the students be able to personally have their voices in the meeting. Would it be plausible for to allow more of them to speak? Not necessarily throughout the entire committee meeting, but throughout part of it, as in this one.
I think it's a possibility, and the last meeting was a perfect example of having a student group come in and to share their personal anecdotes.
Well, and all the meetings are public, so maybe it's just even doing a better job of letting the students know when they're scheduled and actually, making the effort to invite them to come as it, as they're able to. Because I know we also did talk about the reporting thing. The only question I would have about that is, we wanted to make sure that everybody who was participating felt safe enough to participate fully, and that it wasn't necessarily being recorded, or something that they said or brought up was going to be disseminated outside of the room necessarily. So that would just be something we would need to kind of talk about a little bit, I would think.
Great job, Jen. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Hi, good evening. For the greater audience, I am Debbie Capri, the principal at Enders Road Elementary School, and I had the honor of being a part of, or of still being a part of, the Professional Learning Subcommittee. So on behalf of our group, which I very much appreciate, was a representative group. We did have student representation, administration, parents, and certainly faculty. So I appreciated the mix of the voices as we discussed and moved forward with our recommendations. The first part we wanted to just review, according to the New York State CRSE framework, what are kind of those key components that go into professional learning. And the first is really making sure that learning and that teaching and learning, that they're adaptive, that we're constantly re-examining what is needed in terms of professional learning. That when we look at DEI, part of any training is looking at that implicit bias that is within all of us. Professional learners really using a critically conscious lens when we're looking at all different areas, including instruction, curriculum, assessment, history, culture, and institutions. I think a really important part is seeing and looking at that learning has to be self-directed. We're all in a different place, and we're all on a different trajectory. And so it's making sure that we have self-directed opportunities to seek that professional learning. And the last part is that learning, particularly by the CRC framework, is not, I think when we think of professional learning, we might think of faculty and staff, but it also is to include students and families and administration and our community at large. And so all the stakeholders in our community. So we have 3 recommendations. The first one, and you will see some alignment that goes across all of our subcommittees, which I think is really powerful and shows that consistency. So the first one is really looking at either a point person or persons in terms of a committee that's designated to oversee this work. For a few different reasons. One, feeling that just the volume of the work and the management of it, and making sure that it's done well and thoughtfully and in a cohesive way, really needs to have someone or individuals taking leadership and ownership of that work. So feeling that if we're going to create strategic action plans related to professional learning goals for DEI, and we're going to be reflective about them and look at those goals annually in our progress, there really needs to be a set committee and process in place to make that happen. As well as we talk about this, and obviously having our DI committee shows our commitment as a FM community, but having, whether it's a committee or an individual in charge of this work, I think shows even more so our priority as a district to this important work. Our second recommendation, I really appreciate, actually came out of a fabulous conversation with the student representative that was in our group. She really taught us a lot about FM and how there are so many student-led activities, projects, and clubs that are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, many of which I did not know existed and didn't realize the important work that they are doing. So we really felt it was important to build upon that, and that whomever this point person or committee is could identify, support, and really promote those student-led DEI initiatives. We have so many wonderful communication tools we've spoken about through social media and other ways, that when these events and programs are happening that are led by our students, there should be a full house there. And so how do we publicize these efforts and really get the word out? Our students can be amazing agents of change. We just need to give them the opportunity and really help them teach us how to be learning focused as a community. The last one is really looking at that professional learning piece in terms of FM faculty and staff. And we thought it was important to have a two-tiered approach. First, and this is reflective of what the previous group spoke of, that it really needs to be all staff. And so really, whether that's leaders, teachers, support staff, clerical, food service, transportation, custodial, maintenance, coaches, everyone needs to participate in the same foundational level of DEI training that's grounded in the CRSE framework. So we all have that basic knowledge where we're examining and reflecting upon our own implicit bias, where we are looking to be culturally sensitive and really centering the identities of our students and of all students, that we are being culturally responsive to students' experiences. I think also giving staff tools in their toolbox to really respond to what can be very tricky DEI-related situations, so we make sure that all students feel supported and heard. And having just a development of a cohesive language across all staff. So when we talk about DEI as FM staff, we all know where we're coming from, we all know what is our priority and what's important to us, and we have that common language. One conversation we spoke of was an example as a possible resource is there's a training, DEI Matters, by Dr. Meredith Madden from Utica University. We have had some staff here at FM that have participated in some learning opportunities through her and have really been extremely impressed. I know our English department at the high school has been seeking some professional learning through Dr. Madden. So that's one resource. Obviously there are others, but it's one we've heard some really positive feedback that could be a great place to start for that staff-wide foundational training. And then the second tier of that piece is that, again, because everyone's in a different place with their learning, how do we create opportunities for those staff that want to take a deeper dive, that want to learn a little bit more in a particular area related to DEI or to culturally responsive topics? So making sure that those opportunities are available as well. So we're not stopping at that foundational level of training. We're offering more and diverse opportunities for all of our staff to participate in. Those are our three recommendations. Again, I appreciate just hearing one group, but I think you're going to hear it through the next two groups, that there really is quite a bit of alignment. And I think that's powerful in terms of helping us just to narrow our next steps when we're hearing that common voice across the four groups. So I appreciate your time and don't know if you have any questions.
I guess maybe just a clarification.
Yes.
On in recommendation 2, the point person for the student, were you anticipating that would be a student, or is that an adult in the school, or either or?
I think in terms of the initial first recommendation, whether we didn't want to specify exactly or pinpoint who would oversee all of this work, but assuming, I know in some districts it's a director of DEI, in some districts it's a committee. In terms of the goal where it's specifically highlighting the student-led work, it certainly would be important to have student leadership working with whomever that director or professional is within the district. So I think that would have to go hand in hand of having, whether it's an administrator or a committee that's overseeing this work, there would have to be student leadership, particularly in that part, to be that bridge for that.
Thanks so much, Dr. Capri. This is probably impossible, but have you talked about when this kind of training might take place? That's a hard part, right?
It is a hard part. Certainly, there's a lot of mandatory trainings, all equally important, that need to be done. Obviously, the sooner we do this work, the sooner we're doing a better job in the district. I think many of those foundational trainings we do right at the beginning of the year on those August staff development days. So I'm speaking my own personal opinion that I feel like if we're able to at least start the year with that foundational training, on those days, we do have everyone present on one of those days. We're sitting with our colleagues that work in the cafeteria and in transportation. That could be a great time to start that foundational training. So we all begin the year believing in the same thing and in the same place.
Thank you very much, Dr. Capri.
Absolutely. Thank you.
High expectations?
Hi, thank you so much for your time tonight. My name is Amy Blyer Long, and my co-members and I represent the High Expectations and Rigorous Instruction Subcommittee. Over the last 9 months as a subcommittee, we've had deep and wide-ranging discussions, and ultimately we zeroed in on 3 specific areas under this topic: curriculum, assessment, and instruction. And as has already kind of come up within this meeting, one of the things we know are in process are the personalized learning. And so we just want to also emphasize our feeling of the importance of student voice and choice. So student voice and choice will support what's already being discussed, and it lets students feel valued for their opinions and allows them, and their contributions. It allows them to have a say in how they learn and what they learn, how they're assessed, and how mastery is demonstrated. And the student-centered approach, it appeals to individual interests and learning styles, and it motivates students to use problem solving and critical thinking, which are obviously crucial skills for their lives going forward. These discussions connected to these connected to 4 specific areas of the CRSE framework: student-led civic engagement, critical examination of power structures, project-based learning on social justice issues, and student leadership opportunities. We had a lot of goals, but we prioritized 3 specific recommendations you will hear now to support the pursuit of these areas.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carmel McColgan, Instructional Specialist in Special Education at the high school. So we began our work in the committee by considering the issue of disproportionality in special education classification, particularly by gender and socioeconomic status. This led us to a review of the 2022 District New York State report card data to determine the impact of disability classification on achievement levels as reflected in the assessment results. So that review then, coupled with a pretty robust committee discussion and the mandate of our Committee for Higher Expectations and Rigorous Instruction, inspired us to broaden the focus and shaped our first recommendation, which is that the district examine disproportionality in course enrollment through multiple lenses, specifically disability, gender, socioeconomic status, race, and ethnicity, and consider 2 fundamental questions: who takes which levels of courses, and what is the long-term impact in terms of student outcomes on early course level selections? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Heather Taylor, and I'll be discussing recommendation number 2, which is offer high expectations with deeper engagement to all students. One of the key terms used to describe curriculum over the years has been the word rigorous, which typically implies a harsh or a strict system. Our committee is seeking to redefine that to something more meaningful and impactful in the classroom. High expectations and rigorous curriculum should be set in motion when each student has the opportunity to be an equal part of the learning process, where students truly have a voice and a choice. We are focused on bringing inquiry-based learning into each classroom in order to create more civic discourse, in addition to integrating student reflection on learning and assessment practices beginning in the formative years and beyond. Our goal is not to dismantle top-tier courses, that includes AP, honors, and SUPA classes, but greatly improve the courses that are currently labeled below that high level, especially in middle and high school. Additionally, our goal would ensure all materials are digitally accessible and include interactive scaffolding or varied levels of support in learning activities and materials beginning in the early years. A scaffolded, inquiry-based learning curriculum takes into account different learning styles, different capabilities, and understanding bias. We would like to see the district adopt a more universal design for learning and move beyond the one-size-fits-all, as Dr. Tice had mentioned earlier. The emphasis needs to shift from grading to learning in order to give the power back to students and encourage them to have their own voice and their own vision and their own unique high expectations. Our committee hopes that every single student can experience FM's curriculum in a more personal, meaningful, and individualized way. Thank you. Now I'll be followed by Ethan.
I was one of the student representatives for the committee, and a big thing that this subcommittee discussed was the unfortunate reality that much of student learning and engagement has gone stagnant. And so for that reason, we are recommending to integrate goal setting and self-reflection into the formative assessment process, meaning how can we enable students to identify their strengths and weaknesses, but also methods that encourage ongoing reflection. And the first thing that entails is more active student participation in this cycle. What I really mean is how might learning be moved forward into the 21st century learning style. And then the second thing is to integrate student reflection into all styles, cultures, and linguistics. Something as simple as maybe an exit ticket, which might be a little simple for the high school, but something as simple as an exit ticket in the class that reflects not so much on the direct topics learned, but how might the things that have helped the student or relate to their cultures impact their future learning. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Okay, so we tried to project into the future. If we were to take some of these recommendations and look a decade out, what would it look like here at FM? And so we said, we would look to see a more cohesive community of learners. So have more students be able to see themselves in different level classes, not that it's just reserved for certain types of students, that we would be able to have project-based, that students would be working together and see themselves all throughout the curriculum here at FM. More productive and civil discourse, so preparing them for life outside of FM, as well as good citizenship throughout the community and in the world. Activities that connect to and build on student strengths and assets. So have students participate in goal setting and reflection about where their strengths are and where they would want to see themselves get better at it in different skill sets or different pathways that they want to explore in the future. Increase student accountability for their own learning. And that's really that they're engaged with their choices, that they're fully participating in the process, and it's not just something that's handed to them, that they are part of it. And then finally, individualize expectations in multiple avenues for success. So not focusing purely on grades, but really the individualized definitions of success and focus on skill development as opposed to purely on graded tests or homework from that perspective.
Any questions that you might have? we were trying to think about what would make FM a great place to move to. You know, it's not just about test scores, it's about, you know, if you heard that this was the district you were moving into, would you be excited to move there?
I think for me, recommendation 3 about integrating the students into the formative assessment cycle, I think that's incredibly important. I anticipate that's going to be a very difficult thing it's difficult for adults, much less students, to do that. And I think that's where that combined work with the mental health committee might be really helpful, because I know, helping students to understand how to look critically at their own work and, what they're learning, I think it can be incredibly important for them in their development, but I think it also can be a point of like a lot of maybe negative self-critique, and I think kind of supporting the students through that would be really critical, so that they understand that, self-reflection can be a really positive experience. So I really appreciate seeing that here.
So it's like, how do we move from assessment of learning to assessment for learning, and just build in the formative assessment so that it's just not a grade or a static description, but how do you plan next steps? So that might involve different ways to collect data, or what's the back end system looking, and how do you connect into that? And strengths and assets. Sure.
Thank you for the presentation. It seems that like student self-reflection and like kind of self-critique is a major theme for the students here, and it seems, at least to the high school student body throughout my 4 years, that it is definitely a necessary point to consider. I was wondering if the committee has like considered that like one of the main factors that kind of hinder student self-reflection may come from the overwhelming grading and qualifications and assessments that cause students aversion from actually participating in their own study. I wonder if the committee had considered this as a hindrance to self-reflection.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a way to think of with assessment. How do you, if it's not just the assignment grade, at one point is it assignment, and having this where you start every unit, where you're saying, okay, what do I know? What do I learn next? What do I notice? What do I wonder? And integrating, having a space where there's discussion, and it's not just, learning isn't bureaucracy. Let's make it fun and exciting. Yeah.
One of the things we've talked about, and I put the slide up every year for the board members and faculty and administrators who are there on opening day, is the difference between evaluation and assessment. Evaluation, to Ms. Fang's point, is a value judgment. It could be against a set criterion. It could be against the bell curve of population, and it could be against individual progress. And I think that's important, because we do have to measure periodically, but I think if I read Angelina right, I think we need to do more assessment. And assessment comes from the Latin word assidare, meaning to sit beside. And it's time-based. So there's diagnostic before, there's formative, as your slide indicated, during, and then there's summative assessment, which occurs after. And I think sometimes you're right, we get caught up in the grades, as your subcommittee pointed out, and it's okay to do evaluation once in a while, but I think we miss an opportunity, as Angelina's referencing, to have those open and frank conversations, which are assessment. Having in my earlier career as a science teacher and baseball coach for a school district, there's differences between games and scrimmages. And I think we need not just, not every exam as a game. You know what I mean? You have to do a few scrimmages in there too to take the pressure off, start the drill over again. There are no rules in the scrimmage. You can go back. It just isn't a pretend game. You can actually work on different things. And that's where I think those kind of conversations that you're hoping for open up, because it just doesn't have to be a value judgment every time. So good point, thank you.
We appreciate that.
I know I'm preaching to the choir, but
Any other questions? We realize there's another group, so anything else? Thank you so much.
I'm going to use this, just this one.
Hi, my name is Laura Iodice, and I'm a retired English teacher from the high school and a community member. And Mary Cunningham is also a community member, and Kym Jaffe. The person who was supposed to be presenting had a very serious illness in the family, so I'm going to try to pinch hit here. We started with the state's definition of what inclusive curriculum and assessment is all about, and it elevates historically marginalized voices and gives opportunity to learn about power and privilege in the context of various communities. It empowers learners to be agents of positive social change. It provides the opportunity to learn about perspectives beyond one's own scope, and it works towards dismantling systems of biases and inequities and decentering dominant ideologies in education. So our first task was really dismantling what the state was asking us to do, having such varied members on the committee. And the first recommendation that we came up with was the curriculum audit. We were in a peculiar position because we were trying to assess the status of the curriculum, but we've yet to audit the curriculum. So we were, some of the things that we're going to suggest probably are already happening, but because we don't have any formal documentation of that, we really weren't able to eliminate items. So the first thing is to conduct a DEI curriculum audit for all grades, and that includes preschool through 12, in all disciplines, toward the goal of establishing a vertical DEI-focused curriculum, developmentally appropriate for each thread of the curriculum and across grades, so that it becomes recursive. You have a curriculum where in kindergarten, you're going over some skill sets or whatever materials you need, and as you move forward in the grades, it's built in such a way that you can go backward to go forward, that you can, as the other group was talking about, have students self-reflect in order to be able to move forward. You're going to include evaluation of reading and film lists as part of this, and I know librarians are already, some of them are already attempting to do that. But you'd also want to seek suggestions from beyond teachers for parents, staff, administrators, and students, as well as community experts in the particular area that your curriculum is focused on. And one of our group members, Mary Cunningham, was able to put together a model of that I think she distributed in the packet, of what that reading list might look like on a primary level, and also what some of those inquiry questions might look like. And that takes us to the third bullet, which is to look at specific questions and considerations such as those developed by our curriculum committee member who provided them for you to look through. And the state has asked that we include social justice components for all of the curriculum, so we absolutely need to include them in the audit if we're going to include them as part of curriculum. Our second recommendation is to consider the CRSE framework and the recommendations that were made within it. And some of those recommendations include rigorous instruction, inclusive curriculum and assessment when annually assessing and revising curriculum maps. So this recommendation is asking us to use the curriculum maps that have already been developed by teachers to incorporate DEI-focused assessments, so that at the end of the year or in the summer when you're revising or you're developing curriculum for a new course, you're going to specifically address an explanation of how that course map relates to the DEI components that we're looking to build into the courses. Our third recommendation, because this is inclusive curriculum and assessment, is to do an assessment audit to look at the ways in which we are currently assessing, and I think some of this refers to what Angelina was asking about, Ms. Fang, how do students do that when they're worried about grades? This particular assessment audit would explore and include viable alternatives, assessment strategies that look at things besides just a test score. So currently, badging is becoming a big grading or assessment trend across some of the states, and in particular in public education. Colleges are starting to use it, and we've seen some pilots. We did some research and saw some pilot programs in some of the secondary schools now as well. Some of them that mirror our constituents, so it was interesting to see that they were able to incorporate it even in districts where there is a high emphasis on, the outcome, the grade, because of college applications. There are other strategies such as portfolios, and badging actually is tandem to that. Sometimes courses would be able to use badges as ways of showing competencies moving toward mastery. And then you have, as Dr. Tice was saying, the evaluation comes at the end when you're looking at mastery and not just at developing specific competencies. But in order to be fair, you want to be sure that students can also incorporate some of their exhibits and projects, things that are not just designed by the teacher necessarily, as part of that assessment. So if you were doing a project for something outside of the classroom, let's say you were an Eagle Scout and you did some kind of environmental study and you were given an award for that, that should be able to be brought in, and a teacher might be willing to consider that if it was a course in environmental studies as an indicator of competency. We also would hope that students would have equal opportunity to achieve and be recognized for success. And again, that's about including a wide variety of ways to assess a student's progress in a specific competency, rather than just a test at the end of a unit. And some of that actually, our committee really folds in with so much of what other committees have already spoken about, because some of that deals with the reflective assessment, the idea of students being able to self-reflect as a way of proving what they've learned, because sometimes when you self-reflect, you can actually articulate something that didn't show up necessarily as a mastery on a test. And those should be taken into consideration as well. Our fourth recommendation is our other, and that is we were really very fortunate because one of the students in the large group happened to be with us on our subcommittee, and she was enrolled as a TA in the Rhetoric of Race class, which is actually a course that focuses on DEI in the high school. And so she was able to give us a lot of input. We were able to meet with the students. Our subcommittee met with those students, and then those students eventually came and connected with the entire DEI committee at the end of the last session that we had. But some of the concerns they brought up, which are peculiar to their course, won't be an issue once DEI is a focus in every course. But we're using them as a model right now just to explain that sometimes there are problems with the master schedule where students want to enroll in a course, but they're actually in competition with a course. So for instance, the Holocaust course and the Rhetoric course were offered at the same time. And the students that would be drawn to those electives might want to take both of those courses, but they're only one semester. So our recommendation is that at least until you have every course, including something valuable about diversity and equity and inclusion, it would be useful to have those courses that are already doing it have a priority in the scheduling so that students have that opportunity, because it's going to, as Dr. Tice said, it's going to take a while before we get to the point where we're fully incorporating these principles. In relation to that, providing funding and opportunities for field trips, I know that particular course has done field trips down in over on the west side. They've examined the West Side Initiative. They've gone to the Latino museum there, eaten at a Puerto Rican restaurant in the area. So being able to fund those from numerous courses for those opportunities to actually get outside of the classroom and for the community beyond our local community to become the classroom There are museums, you know, like the Harriet Tubman Museum. The Native community has an arena that you can visit. And also to be able to provide academic credit-bearing opportunities for students that are taking internships in the community, that they can actually get credit for that. So for instance, right now, people who volunteer to become teaching assistants in our rhetoric class have a letter attached to their transcript explaining their service, but they don't have anything offering credit for doing those kinds of extra responsibilities in their school day. It would be a very valuable thing if some of those opportunities, that their internships and other coursework, could be recognized with credit. This was something that came up a lot in the DEI meetings in general, and in particular in our session, because it involved curriculum. And that is, if the faculty are going to be making these changes in their courses, they really want to feel that and know that they have the backing of the administration, so that if they get difficult conversations happening, they know that they've got somebody behind them supporting them, because they're doing what we're asking them to do as a district. And then making sure we include community DEI professionals as part of the designing of the curriculum, for instance, on curriculum council, and also if they have a particular expertise as part of the department's meetings when they're looking at curriculum, and absolutely student representation on the curriculum council, and encouraging student-focused panels and dialogues that are DEI focused. Questions?
And Craig, I'll ask this because I know that we offer, so to the suggestion about the credit, I know that within our music department now, if students take private lessons and it's documented, that they can get credit for their transcripts. How hard, or with Pat coming in now at the high school, is this something that maybe him and the administration could talk about to see if we can dovetail that together?
I mean, we can look at any and all of it, whether it's music, whether it's phys ed, whatever. I mean, at this Pittsburgh conference, Michael Nagler from Mineola was also invited. And he actually, and I think I shared this with the group, purchased a vacant bank and opened it up and set it up like a college library, you know, study hall kind of a thing. And kids actually work on taking care of what's required in order to do some of their passion projects and that. So that's happening right in New York State. So we can visit that. We can visit whatever's in Pittsburgh. I mean, there are different models out there to do exactly what you're saying. Honor what we have to check the boxes on, and the kids blow through that in order to roll up their sleeves and collaborate with others and dive into passion projects. So there's tons of opportunities, that just being an example.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just in closure, I just think there's a lot of opportunities here. Not only the foresight of the District DEI Committee to want to partner with the Mental Health Task Force because of overlaps, but there's things that we can do and start small. I think as you look at the CRSE framework, which the groups did such an outstanding job tonight outlining each of those areas, as we're called here, it's really giving, you know, providing opportunities in a welcoming environment, as Dr. Doughton is fond of saying, calling people in rather than calling them out. And we can try little things. We're not lowering expectations. The expectations are still high. We're trying to allow the students to see themselves in their education. As some of you know, in my own dissertation in Skinny Atlas, we bought the car length lab coats at the elementary level for elementary science. And I had somebody wag their finger at me saying I was perpetuating the myth of old white balding scientists in glasses and lab coats. And the point was, no, we're perpetuating that they can see themselves in a lab coat. So I just think there's a ton of opportunities here for us. And one of the things with the board in front of their computers here, one of the things that got called out at the Pittsburgh conference is Little Bets. I don't know if anybody's read that book by Peter Sims. I don't know, Chrissy, is that at the Teacher Center at all? Google it. It's called Little Bets by Peter Sims. And it starts out with small little things is really what changes the world. And so what our committee's laid out for us today are some pretty grandiose plans, and I think we can chip away at it. But I think it's the little bets too. And maybe there's something that we can start with here with the board's pleasure, and I'll look to Mr. Corbett, who's already settled out a budget. Yeah, you can hide, you can run, but you can't hide. But maybe there's opportunities for Hornet mini grants to try to encourage these little bets. And so I will ask our district clerk to possibly order some of these books. I have not read it yet, but it was a big talk at the Pittsburgh conference. And it talks about all the things, as you can read, even if you're on the Amazon page right now like I am, it's just all the things that occurred over time. You know what I mean? Starting with little bets, and one thing leads to another. And so I think there's a ton of opportunities here for our students, for our faculty, to engage in some of this as we go forward. So thank you to the District DEI Committee. I must say, job well done, and looking forward to possibly having a lot of little bets as we go forward. Thank you.
We'll take a short break to allow the members of the DEI committee to leave if they'd like. Long night. Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. Okay, we'll get started again. Next item on the agenda, 2.03, the President's Report. So just as follow-up to, recently the board received correspondence from the Sierra Club in regards to electric buses. Their concerns in regards to the district implementing the electric buses. Dr. Tice has a meeting scheduled on Friday at 11 a.m. with the head of the Sierra Club, local head of the Sierra Club, and that meeting may include Assemblyman Sturpey, and some other people from the Sierra Club. So that'll be a good opportunity for our district to discuss what we are doing with electric buses with some concerned community members. Yes, thank you, Dr. Tice. Second, I did attend the town of Manlius's initial meeting to discuss the possibility of I'm going to call it aquatic center. Went very well, I think. There were 4 counselors present, 2 parents who have some involvement or who've had some involvement in the swimming and dive program, in addition to myself, Dr. Tice, and Mr. Corbin. And in this meeting, there were a lot of ideas talked about as to what this could possibly look like. Not just perhaps a pool that the swimming and dive team could use, but also there could be other lanes, other pools for members of the community. They talked about gauging the interest of the community and seeing what community members would like to have in this type of facility. So there was some activity at the recent Earth Day to solicit input from community members about what would you like to see in a facility like this. Ice ring, splash pad, thinking about the different age groups in the community, what would be something that might benefit seniors, and then students of all, or kids of all different ages, as well as adults. So what would be something that would really be beneficial to all of the members of our community. They are looking for other people more people who would like to be involved. There's a lot of interest in helping with this process. I suggested that they really take a look at making sure that there is representation from the villages, Fayetteville, Manoa, and Manlius, as well as the town, making sure there's someone there who has some experience in inclusion so that they can make sure that if we're targeting activities towards being inclusive and having programming for seniors or persons with disabilities, individuals with disabilities, that we have someone who has experience doing that on the committee. Also making sure that they have representation from different demographics, parents. Even though East Syracuse, they have elected not to send anyone from their district to participate. We do have people in Manoa as part of the town of Manlius, so I'm thinking that I suggested that it also include parents and students from that part of Manoa so that they are represented as well. But I sent a brief little chart to John with some suggestions for different demographics that he might want to include. So at this point, it's open to people who'd like to submit their name to, I believe you sent it to John, and express an interest and what you might be able to bring to the committee. I'm sure there'll be opportunities for people who have publicity, fundraising, all sorts of, people obviously who've had a background or interest in the swim and dive team. But, just to caution people, you can't have a huge committee, so just send a letter of interest to John Deere, and they will put together their final committee. I believe the other group, the Community Aquatics Group, also has a steering committee of some sort that's working to develop some advice or counsel for this town group. I'm not sure how that's going to fit in yet, or how those two will work together, but that's something for a later discussion. But it was a good initial meeting, and I think the next meeting date, actually, they have that. Let's see if I still have it on my calendar. Next 2 meetings, yes. Oh boy. I believe it was, we didn't want to do it on the night we had the board meeting. Dr. Tice, was that June 3rd? I think it was June 3rd.
Maybe we could put it out now.
Yes, we can put that into board docs and make sure everyone's aware of those 2 meetings in June 3rd. is the next one, and then there's one in July. And we're trying to make sure that that didn't coincide with the reorganization meeting in July. So I believe the date for that might have been, yeah, it seems to not be on my calendar. Do you have that one, Dr. Tice? July 15th. So, and they met at 5:30. They had a virtual options if people couldn't be at the town in person. And I think they tend to do those. So if people can't get there in person, you can attend virtually. But again, just reach out to John and let him know your interest and what area you think you might be able to represent. And he's going to build his committee from there.
So I'm assuming like the three of you participated for the district, right? Are you guys talking about from the district's perspective, who the right people would be to encourage to get on the committee? So, you know, if we're talking about just helping to support the school district, I mean, I assume that's why you guys are.
Yeah, I think this is,
right?
I mean, this is was just the initial meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, they talked about not only pool, but they talked about indoor turf, they talked about ice rink, they talked about
So like it's
hall, so I think they've got to narrow it down, and if they're going to focus on just the pool at the exclusion of something else, so.
I think if I understand
The
your
scope of the project.
Like it's Scott Sugar, for example, participating because he would represent all of our athletic teams. Because if, I assume, we're looking at it from how it would benefit, or our district, our students and faculty and staff really could utilize a facility like that, right?
There are some pro pool folks on there looking at it from the community perspective too, that are part of that little subset that started. So they're looking at it for senior citizens, everybody.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, so obviously the town, they have to, if it's a town initiated thing, they have to figure out who to get the right people in the room for from a broad point of view. But if it's just, we have to answer the question from the district, right? That's why, so have you talked about who you think from the district you need to be encouraging to join the town's committee and how that process would work?
I think eventually we'll get there. I don't know if you want to, I think eventually we'll get there. This was just the organizational meeting, and they were doing a short survey on Earth Day. So I think these are baby steps. But eventually I think we'll get to that point, yeah.
I think I'm going to try to maybe ask the question a slightly different way. We had some emails about this earlier in April. And Sarah had raised the question that at the Town of Manlius board meeting, the board said they were planning this meeting that you all were just referring to, and that Marissa was on that committee as FM school board representative, which was I wasn't there, was what I gathered from your email, what their perception was. So that's what I want to just understand is the representation as a representative of the board, in which case that's probably something we should talk about and open up, or is it in some other capacity?
So what I've talked to John about is representing more as a resident, because as a board, it's actually the district that's represented, which would be Dr. Tice and or his designees. So to your point, talking about who in the district would represent, at that meeting, they were very pleased to have Mr. Corbin and Dr. Tice there, because they can sort of have that global umbrella effect for all the different, for sports, for athletics, for finance, for facilities, all those different things. And I'm more looking at it as representing, asking to be on the committee as just a community member. And what I suggested to them is, because John was concerned about the committee growth, and you can't have this huge committee, just making sure there were representations from all the different demographics in our community. So students from both school districts, parents from both school districts, athletes and non-athletes, senior citizens, as I said, someone who had some inclusion background. Obviously, they have town councilors who are very interested in this project. perhaps people from the chamber, et cetera. But that was just my suggestion. I don't know how he's going to shape it out. So what I would say to folks, I think as a district, the district's represented by the superintendent and Mr. Corbin. Based on what I've learned at this meeting, I didn't learn that at the meeting, but I'm just saying, based on where I see this committee going and what they're looking for from us, is they're looking for district representation, which I believe, which is the superintendent and his designees, but then they're also looking for community members. And he has not defined like what those different groups would be, but he has said that anyone who's interested should reach out to him under the understanding that he can't put everybody on there, but he does want to hear from interested community members. I think as a district, we also should put it back perhaps on our website maybe, or get information just to let people know about this, because there is some interest in the community about some type of facility, especially for our students, because it would be really good to have students not just from the high school, but the middle school involved. So if we can figure out ways to make sure that students are aware that this is an opportunity for them. If you'd like, I can get you the information for John, and perhaps we can connect you two together to think of how we might be able to recruit students from the high school.
So Marissa, just, because maybe you didn't hear the previous town board meeting, John specifically said he was trying to get a representative from ESM's school board and from FM's school board. And when he was asked who FM's school board representative was, he said it was you. So not community member Marissa Mims, it was school board member. So I think we just need to clarify.
Right. So I'm just saying after that meeting, I think there's some clarification to that. And initially, when John reached out to Dr. Tice and myself, it was also to the school board president in ESM as well as Donna. So it was that parallel thing. But now they've had some discussion, and now they're looking at who do we need around the table. And the district representation from the superintendent, because that's who represents the district, obviously. And there wasn't discussion of having like board members, board president, or those type of roles. It was more about who do we need specifically from different parts of the community to represent certain demographics. So again, if anyone's interested, I think the best thing to do is to reach out to John and express your interest and maybe what demographic or what group you're representing, and so he can kind of build his own committee, because this is the town's committee, and ultimately it will be up to the town to decide how who needs to be on the committee. If you'd like to have someone represent the board on there, then again, you can explore, or other people, then also reach out to John and say, hey, we think, or actually it would be through Dr. Tice, and say, hey, we'd like these specific people to be part of your contingent. But again, leaving that it's up to the town to decide.
Okay. So sorry. So he does not want, he's not asking for somebody from FM's Board of Education. Is that correct? I guess Dr. Tice,
This was exploratory. All that I took
know.
away from this is I affirmed our interest, given the success of our teams, given the fact that we're combined teams, we would be interested. I said that we work all for the same taxpayers. I just know, I don't want to speak for other school districts not in the room. They have their own opinion, but I needed to affirm our interest and that we're behind this project, whatever shape it takes.
Any additional questions? Okay, next on the agenda, item 2.04, Superintendent's Report. Dr. Tice?
I've talked enough tonight. The backup information is in board docs. I was going to talk about the high school capital projects moving along. We had a chance to tour the facility. I'll let members of the facilities committee that were there embellish on that in the facilities committee report. My next item was to remind the community about the capital project, mini capital project proposition that's on this year's ballot. That's something I had promised the facilities committee to do leading up to the vote. These are the high priority area items from the building conditions survey that was recently submitted to the state, as well as safety and security audits that we did last summer. These are things that really cannot wait. I had in here too what Mr. Seidberg mentioned about one of the cabinets from the high school science classroom falling off the wall, in part due to a persistent roof leak. And then last but not least was what I talked quite a bit about tonight, was the National Summit in Pittsburgh on a community-wide approach that involved nonprofits, that involved public agencies, the Carnegie Science Museum, if you've been there in Pittsburgh, and the Children's Learning Lab. It's just fascinating, all the different resources they've been able to pull together. As you know, this is the book that is our read this year. Our administrative council has been going through it, thanks to Dr. Doughton. It's Greg Baer's book, When You Wonder You're Learning, which lauds the foundational work of Fred Rogers and the Arsenal Family and Children's Center, co-founded by our rock star pediatrician, Dr. Benjamin Spock, whose book, I think, probably ended up on a lot of our parents' bookshelves. Other luminaries at Arsenal included Dr. Margaret McFarland from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine and German-American psychologist Dr. Eric Erickson. And as I talked to our district clerk when I called in to check on the status of the district, the first day of the conference was kind of an overview on all the community support, and that we often in education kind of look for the new research and the newfangled ways of doing things. And actually, this is a throwback, that the things that Fred Rogers did with the neighborhood was actually grounded in educational theory. And oftentimes in education, we kind of look for the newfangled thing, never really try it out and do it. And what they've done in Pittsburgh is really a throwback to just taking the curiosity, promoting curiosity with students, the voice and choice that you heard our subcommittees talk about tonight. It just really, you know, don't look for the newfangled thing. Sometimes it's a throwback to the past. So the second day of the trip were site visits. And then what I talked to Sarah about, I said, boy, I didn't see it coming, is the last item in there is that they had representatives from GELP, Global Education Leaders Program. And what that is, and I told her, I said, I didn't see this one coming. They were the facilitators for the group discussions, the table facilitating on the last day of the conference, but they were from Singapore, Finland, all the things we've talked about, whether it's Singapore math or how the Finns are doing it. And the bottom line is, we're all working on this together. And it was just a powerful message, you know, for that conference to end with. And that's why I told her, I said, I didn't see that coming, because we're all in it together. And we, in a world where one district gets competed against, you know, competes against another district, and what are these scores, and politicians looking for quick fixes and to say that they boosted this or whatever. The point is, you know, to have somebody from Finland there and from Singapore, you know, it just reinforced that this is a global world, you know, that we live in, and the world is small, and sometimes it's looking back to the past. Pretty impressive. That ends my report. Thank you. Well, it's great to be invited, but I'll tell you, there were 4 of us from New York. I mentioned Mike Nagler, Dr. Nagler, Dr. Gladys Cruz, who's the president of AASA, and then another person who I think all of you know, another Dr. Tice. And she actually sent a team from Oneida there ahead of time. So not that both Dr. Tices aren't competitive, but she actually sent a team from Oneida. They visited actually the Monday and Tuesday, kind of before the conference started. And Greg Baer, who wrote the book, said we're all invited. So I mean, if we want to take a road trip, he says you're welcome here anytime. So just very, very impressive, and it was nice to be part of that small group.
Any questions for Dr. Tice? Okay, and we'll move on to, oops, sorry, go ahead.
I just have one, and not necessarily an answer tonight, but just a reminder that there was still a pending question. We were waiting on an answer, final answer for pool arrangements for this fall. There was a pending question from a community member, and it had gotten forwarded to you, and I don't think that there's been a final answer on that.
Okay, I'll have to double check. I thought I sent that out, didn't I?
There was a follow-up to it. You were waiting for Scott to return the following Monday, and I don't think we've heard anything since then.
Yeah, but the memo I asked for him said that the arrangements are the arrangements that I indicated earlier. Did everybody get that? Then there was a question, we didn't want brand X, we wanted brand Y, right? That's where I am. And then the question was, brand X was afternoon, brand Y would have to be later unless there was a cancellation, right? Here, I know there was an interest in being in the afternoon versus later evening. So I think that's where the one facility was selected over the other. So I haven't heard back from him. I haven't connected on was there availability, if that's what you're asking. I haven't.
Well, Dr. Tice,
Close that.
the question I had to that was, what was the preference of the students? So did the students prefer to have their practice time at an earlier time, which would mean they would have to go to one particular school because of when it's available, or would they be okay with having it at a later time? So I was interested in hearing back as far as what students and parents, because they're going to be driving a lot, or should have some input as well, what their feelings were as regards to a earlier or later start time. So do we have that information yet?
I will ask Dr. Sugar. I haven't heard.
Okay, moving on to item 2.05, committee and representative updates. Just in the interest of time, if they're all posted here, but if people do want to say something, we could keep it short so we could keep the board moving. So let's see, audit finance met on the 3rd. Not till June 10th. Next meeting. Community relations, not meeting again till the 30th of May. Facilities, next meeting is the 23rd. Was there any?
I just have a quick facilities question, Craig. What's the status of the windows for the tech edition that were delayed?
They're installed, I think, with the exception, there's still 2 pieces of plywood up there. What's that? So since we did the tour, everything but 2 windows are missing. So there's 2 pieces of plywood, but that tech edition, yeah.
So then, Craig, just to follow up to that, so do we anticipate students using that space this academic year, or do we think it's delayed now until next fall?
We had talked about that as an OACM team, if we can get the windows in there and move things in. We don't want to have any breach of security where things are accessible because it's just the plywood. We have to worry about egress issues and fire escape. So we have the gift of the last couple months here. So the decision was made. If they come in, they can move in, but we're not going to rush them in. We're not going to try to force the issue.
But it also sounds like we don't have a set date. So I understand that we're at the mercy of getting in the windows. I get that. But we don't have, like, right now, there's not a new targeted date to say it's going to be, before Memorial Day or whatnot, correct?
At this point, no, but we want it to be able to move in by the end of the year because they have to start demolition on the other facilities.
Yep.
Policy committee met most recently on the 29th. Next meeting is on the May 20th. All set there? Okay. DEI committee, well, we just had a wonderful report from them, so I think we're good there. Next meeting, June 12th. Then mental health task force, next meeting is on the 15th, May 15th. Daryl, do you have anything as our legislative liaison?
Only that I'm doing virtual lobbying tomorrow, childcare, the NSBA program. Thank you for asking.
And Angelina, did you have a report for us this evening?
Just some very short updates. So in May, the Asian American Pacific Islander Month was kicked off on May 1st by an assembly, 2 mandatory assemblies that involved poetry, dance, and martial arts, and it was well received by the school community. And some of the performances will be carried on and performed again at the Out of the Darkness Walk that will be on June 7th, and the entire community is invited. It's for suicide awareness and mental health awareness. And currently, students are very active in fundraising door to door and preparing for their performances for this large event. In addition, the ASL club in the high school has continued to advocate for the addition of the American Sign Language course, and they plan to kind of like add their input to the board whenever possible. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have public comment, and I believe we do have 2 people for public comment this evening. Is Lauren here? Hi, Lauren.
Good evening. My name is Lauren Ruffridge. I'm a mother of 3 children in the district, and I am a speech-language pathologist by profession. My oldest child is in 3rd grade right now at Enders. And over this school year, I have read the reminders in the Enders Express about when smartwatches are allowed and are not allowed. And I've also heard my son and his friends talk about kids in 3rd and 4th grade who already have smartphones. I also worked as a long-term sub at one of the middle schools last year, and it was my first exposure to this age range and the constant presence of their phones. About a year ago, in May 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General gave a public advisory warning of the risks of social media use for young people. He noted that while we don't fully understand the effects of social media, there is evidence that it can have a profound risk of harm to the mental health and well-being of children and adolescents. As a parent, I'm extremely concerned and stressed about this smartphone, social media reality that awaits my own children. And in the last several months, I've spoken with many parents who share the same concerns. Together with a few parents, I've been working with the Fayetteville Library on setting up a community event to create a space for concerned caregivers to come together to kind of learn, talk, and support one another in navigating the ever-evolving presence of the smartphone and social media as our children get older. I brought this idea to Captain Stanton of the Town of Manlius Police Department, and she was kind enough to connect me with the Wellwood School Information Resource Officer, Officer Palmer, who is going to give a presentation at this community event. The topic is going to be something along the lines of parenting in the age of social media and smartphones. We have it scheduled to take place on Monday, June 3rd at 6:30 p.m. at the Fayetteville Library. The Eagle Hill HSA president is going to be there to represent, as will a woman named Shannon Hodson of Kids Unplugged Central New York to share some resources. Our hope is to offer an event where parents can be more informed about social media and smartphones and also lean on one another as we try to navigate this uncharted territory, and also to kind of hear from parents of those who are already going through it with their middle schoolers and high schoolers. And so tonight I'm here just to share about this event with all of you and to ask that you will consider sharing the event flyer district-wide so that we can spread the word and help facilitate bringing caregivers together on this topic to support each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Tice said something we would be able to do, get the flyer out to our parents and staff.
What group did you say it was?
With the Fayetteville Library.
Fayetteville Library.
Yeah.
We collaborate with the Fayetteville Library.
Yeah, Leah Krause is my contact at the Fayetteville
Perfect.
Library.
Thank you.
Next, is it pronounced Shara? Shreya, I apologize. Thank you for correcting me.
Hi, my name is Shreya Bhattacharya. I'm a current junior at the high school. So I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about the importance of mental health, especially like in our systems and what we have in place and what more I think would be possible to do. So just looking in general at the importance of mental health in educational settings. The National Alliance on Mental Illness has said that 60% of high schoolers with mental illness don't graduate. So just looking at what role do educational systems play in combating this, and what more can be done to make sure that we assist high schoolers with mental illness and assist them with any needs that they may have. Also just raising awareness, I think in general, over like the past couple of years, I think FM has done a great job making mental health resources more available and prioritizing that, but just I think a main aspect of that is having students be more aware of that. Going with that is also just the stigma in schools of addressing mental health overall, and just considering that school is just such a developmental place for all of us, from like when we're kindergartners all the way up until we're seniors in high school, just how important addressing mental health could be in those situations. So this year and the past year, I've conducted a survey for high school students. This year we had about 120 responses. So the next paper shows just some of the main takeaways from this. So you can see that 88.4% of respondents think that FM can do more to make mental health resources well known, which I think just goes with the fact that we have so many of these resources, but what more can we do so students are aware that they're there and they feel comfortable going to them? And then if we go along with that, there's 60% of respondents said that they didn't even know that the high school had a psychologist in the building. So what more can we do to advertise that and make students more safe and comfortable in these environments? Additionally, 75% of respondents consider high school to be very stressful and want help combating that. So just finding ways to go along with that and any methods we can do to help with that. So on the last paper, we can see just some potential action steps and how to help. Some of them just are reiterating what FM has done already. For example, increasing the number of workshops we have pertaining to mental health. I'm aware that in the month of December in the past year, there were Mental Health Mondays. So if we could consider virtual workshops or anything that is for parents or anyone in general, I think workshops are a really great way to help people overall. Going with that is making the variety of resources available more public and connecting that to the fact that a lot of high schoolers aren't aware of them. So just doing that, as well as potentially monthly support groups for high school students, I think would be a great way to help students feel more comfortable talking about their mental health and addressing the mental health stigma. There are other potential action steps here, but take a look and feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the agenda, item 4.01, approval of the minutes from the April 15th meeting. Is there a motion that the board approve the April 15th meeting minutes? Thank you, Cindy. Second from Chrissy. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? Jason, Dan, and wasn't there a third person missing? Oh, okay. All right. Next, item 4.02, approval of the minutes from the April 17th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting held on April 17th? Thank you, Daryl. Second from Kelly. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? And then abstentions. Got it. This is a special meeting that we had on the 17th for the BOCES vote. I don't believe you were there. Okay, thank you. Next, item 4.03, approval of a wire transfer. Is there a motion that the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius Central School District authorizes the district treasurer or his or her designee to authorize wire transfers in the total of $3,650,103.13 to banks as designated by the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York for repayment of various serial construction bonds. Is there a motion? Dan, and second from Jason. Any discussion? All those in favor, please indicate aye. Aye. And anyone opposed or abstaining? Item 4.04. Is there a motion that the board authorizes the district treasurer or his or her designee to authorize one wire transfer in the amount of $15,815,257.64 to the Depository Trust Company for repayment of a construction bond anticipation notes? It was Dan and Daryl. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? Moving on to item 4.05, is there a motion that the Board of Education approves of the revised designations as proposed? Is there a motion? Sarah and Jason, any discussion? All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. And no one's opposed or abstaining. Board Development, excuse me. See nothing there. Does anyone have anything under Board Development they wish to bring up? Potential considerations for future meeting. There are a number of items there. School start time, future planning for UPK, restorative justice, the pool aquatic center, and, well, pending development of a community committee by the town of Manlius. So we've had updates there. And American Sign Language course. Are there any updates on any of those, Dr. Tice?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Future meetings calendar.
Can we potentially add one to that? It's been quite a number of years since we've done a formal population study and forecast in the district, and as we're putting together this long-range plan, especially with the updated BCS, I think it would be really helpful to have an updated study on that. I think some of our numbers that we're seeing in the buildings today are different than had been perhaps projected last time we had a study done. So if we could work on that, that would be super helpful.
Okay. Moving on to our future meetings calendar, we have our special meeting on May 21st, which will take place in the Wellwood Library for the superintendent's mid-year evaluation. Dates to remember.
And we'll start before going into exec session.
Right, it starts public and then we go
Public, we
executive
may have
session.
some personnel.
Okay. Dates to remember.
So one thing I don't see on the dates to remember is related to the public comment. So there is the mental health virtual sessions. I think there was one last Thursday, and then there's one like this Thursday and maybe the next. I don't know why they're not on the district calendar, but just to get the word out that those are open to parents and caregivers and students and.
Yeah, we can check with communications, because they did the article and we pushed the flyer out via Parent Square.
Thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Kelly, second from Chrissy. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. No one's opposed or abstaining. Great. We're moving on to 9.01, proposed executive session. So we have two items, the discussion of the mid-year and year-end evaluation of the superintendent. Is there a motion to go into executive session for those two matters? Thank you, Daryl. Second from Cindy. Any discussion? All those in favor, please indicate aye. Aye. And no one's opposed or abstaining. So go into executive session, and then we will adjourn with no further public business. Thank you.